Hello internet friends. It's me, Beatrice, back with the juicy stuff straight out of Reddit. Today I will be reading the best stories of Reddit from the past month. Sit back and enjoy. If you enjoy the stories, don't forget to tap the like button and subscribe. Press the bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. Now on to the stories. Posted by Gamer Clemmy. Titled, Am I the a-hole for refusing to sacrifice for my youngest brother because I don't believe my parents? I'm the oldest of 4. We are 16 female, 13 male, 12 female and 9 male. My parents are pretty irresponsible with money, which has left us short more than once. We'd have missed birthday parties and stuff. They would always say it would be made up for, and with my siblings, that was true. My sister's 8th birthday party was skipped because they ran out of money. She got a really cool gift a couple of months late though, and her 9th birthday party was crazy. Same with 13 male. He'd wanted a games console for Christmas and our parents couldn't afford it, so they promised if he waited a bit he'd get that plus 5 new games for it. It was especially tough on us when 9 male was diagnosed with cancer when he was 5. A lot changed financially except for my parents' responsibility with it. And they have especially done their best to make things up to him in crazy big ways, or they try to avoid having things not work with him especially. With me, they make the promise to make it up to me but never do. My 7th birthday was never made up for, neither was my 8th or my 10th. They have taken money off me and never paid it back. They have made me cancel plans and then promised they would make up for it and never did. I have asked about it and they always say they will, but they never do. And then my siblings started asking me for stuff our parents couldn't afford, and my parents would beg me to not let them down. Now it has come up again. My youngest brother will be 10 soon and they want to throw him a big birthday party to celebrate making it out of lockdown, but also to mark another year cancer-free. They can't afford it though, and they want to borrow the $400 off me. Now, I do have the money, I have savings that I hide, and I could in theory do it. But that would be me paying for it, not it being borrowed. And so I told them no. I said I didn't believe them and I wasn't paying for more stuff out of my own pocket so everyone else could be happy at my expense. That nobody would do it for me. My parents told me I need to think of my siblings first. That they will pay me back, that they always do their best for us, and now isn't the time to take my issues with them out on my siblings. But my siblings don't give a crap either. One time my brother couldn't get a brand new game on launch day because I wouldn't give him the money, and he called me a bitch who does nothing for them ever. My parents always took credit for the stuff I paid for. They have always said they made it work, and my siblings do not believe the stuff I have missed out on. So for me it's like, why would I sacrifice when I'm apparently shit who does nothing for anybody and lies all the time? And yet I know this is on my parents. They have taken so much money off me over the last 3 years, and even before, birthday money from friends, they took. It's probably close to 5k they have taken from me over the last 8 or so years. It's not just groceries either, but gifts and parties for my siblings and treats for them. Am I the a-hole? Here's the verdict. Not the a-hole, OP. Yours is a classic case of parentification. You are in no way responsible for your siblings' needs. Put your foot down and try to save as much money as possible. You'll need it to get the hell out of that house once you turn 18. Down in the comments, Jonish says, this is financial abuse. OP needs to educate themselves on how to handle their own finances. They certainly aren't learning it from those parents. Not the a-hole, of course. Further down in the comments, Downright Mystical says, not the a-hole at all. Frankly, I would say start planning for your future now, and get out from under your parents as soon as you are legally able. It is not your responsibility to provide for your siblings, financially or otherwise. Now on to the next story. Posted by Straight News 75. Titled, Am I the a-hole for wanting my wife to kick out her pregnant twin sister? My wife and her twin sister are each other's best friends. They've supported each other in everything, even when her sister had cancer. They talk to each other pretty much every day. When sister-in-law got pregnant, the baby daddy left, so my wife offered to let her stay with us without asking me. Sister-in-law had been incredibly rude and I want her gone. She purposely trashes the house and I'm the one who cleans it up. Every time I have a problem with her, my wife jumps in and says it's hormones, and she says I can't say anything since I can't get pregnant. Which is true, but I still think it's unnecessary. She's incredibly lazy and acts like we're her maids. She wakes up in the middle of the night to tell us that she's craving food, but I refuse to wake up in the middle of the night to get her something. She needs to go, in my opinion, but my wife says otherwise. She says that kicking out a pregnant woman would be cruel and that it's her sister, and that suggesting it at all makes me an asshole. But I'm so tired of the blatant disrespect. Am I the a-hole for wanting my wife to kick her out? Here's the verdict. Not the a-hole. It's your house too. Your wife should have discussed with you before sending an invitation to her sister. On top of that, her entitlement is frankly disgusting. OP, you are not her slave. Stop cleaning after her. Down in the comments, Evil Mel says, just stop picking up after her, that's your wife's job. The sister-in-law is your wife's guest, so the wife should be cleaning up after her. Not the a-hole. But you won't win this. Either deal with it or stay with a friend for a week, to see how well your wife handles her sister by herself. Parsnip Busy says, not the a-hole. Tell your wife to get a second job to buy her an apartment or hotel room, because you are not staff and she's a grown woman. Because that pregnant woman will turn into a woman with a baby, then you're caring for a baby that you didn't make. Cleaning up after 3 people. With more excuses for why she is the way she is. Hormones don't make you an inconsiderate person. Further down in the comments, Reddit DK2 says, not the a-hole, but the sister and your wife is. The decision on whether to let someone live with you should be a joint decision. The fact it wasn't means you have a wife problem, not just a sister-in-law problem. You need to ask your wife how long she expects sister-in-law to stay. And what kind of behavior should not be allowed. Then decide if that is something you can live with. Just realize that as close as it sounds like the two are, if you ask her to choose, she might not choose you. Now on to the next story. Posted by TopMorning7673. Titled, Am I the a-hole for failing an otherwise good student on her last internship, costing her a job? So, I'll try to make this quick. I'm 32, female and a physical therapist in Europe. For 7 years now, I have been working with a local university, taking students in for their placements, and it's honestly one of my favorite parts of my job. In February, I was asked to supervise a student on her final internship, and as usual I agreed. On the day the student was supposed to start, she showed up late, looking like an absolute wreck, and when I asked if everything was okay, she broke down crying and told me that her fiancé had literally just broken up with her that morning. Like, over breakfast. I felt so bad for her. I told her that it was fine if she wanted to take a couple of days off and then would make them up later. She apologized profusely for being unprofessional, thanked me, and told me she'd start in 2 days and she'd be better. The thing is, she wasn't better. Especially over the first couple of weeks, she would take multiple, long bathroom breaks and come out all puffy-eyed. She did the bare minimum I asked of her, but she was often distracted, didn't remember basic things about patients, didn't know what to do unless I explicitly told her. About 2 weeks in, I told her that unfortunately she wasn't performing and that she needed to step up. She said she already had a job lined up after uni, begged me not to fail her and promised she'd try. We had to have this same conversation multiple times over the 3-month internship because she kept barely improving, I even reeled in her supervisor from school, who told me that the student was committed to doing better and asked me to have patience. Things did not improve, though, and therefore I had to fail her. The student cried and was even a little disrespectful, saying that she wouldn't be able to graduate because of me, that I had ruined her career. I tried to explain my view, but she wasn't very keen on talking and left in the middle of the last day. Later, I got a call from the student's supervisor at school, asking me to reconsider because she was otherwise really good, top of her class, apparently, and that she was sure she had at least done the bare minimum. Which maybe she did, but I don't think that the bare minimum is enough in this situation, and I think she didn't learn anything in this internship and would benefit from another one where she could actually learn. The supervisor ended up admitting that this student was going to be working for someone she knew and that now she had to pass up on a great opportunity because of me. They even implied I was petty for failing this student and that they would reconsider sending me more students to supervise because she felt my grades weren't fair. Honestly, as much as it pained me failing a student for the first time, I was somewhat confident in my decision. But now I feel bad, especially knowing that this has jeopardized me supervising any more students, which is a passion of mine. Was I the a-hole failing this student? Edited to add info. Some other users have pointed out that this information I added in a comment should be in the original post, so I'm putting it here. It's fully graded, meaning that we get an Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of criteria, we grade them according to each criteria, and then that adds up to a final grade. Her partial scores in some areas, being proactive, improvement, showing clinical reasoning, were so low that it resulted in a failing grade. I communicated that what she was doing was not enough. Unfortunately, due to character limits, I couldn't fully detail every conversation I had with her, but I was very clear with her and her supervisor when I reeled her in that she wasn't doing enough to pass, hence the promises of improvement. Here's the verdict. Not the a-hole. This one's a bit complicated, but OP used a rubric to grade that leads me to believe that the grading was fair. The student I can't blame too much for not handling the failing grade well. Honestly, the biggest a-hole here is the supervisor. His demand for a passing grade was way out of line. Down in the comments, Most Disaster 79 says, "Not the a-hole. I would suggest talking to one of the higher-ups about her advisor's actions. I get being loyal and protective over your students, but attempting to convince you to change your mind about failing a student, who didn't even do anything that she was supposed to, is highly inappropriate. Just because she did barely the minimum doesn't mean she learned anything. It's a shame if their school only strives for the bare minimum, which is what it seems like with her supervisor." Hitching Post says, "It's not about what the school strives for, it's about clearly and fairly communicated standards. If a professor gives a test, and tells students they need to get 60 questions right out of 100 to pass, and a student gets exactly 60 questions right, it would be fundamentally unfair to turn around and fail them because they should strive for more than the minimum. The same seems to be true here. If a minimum standard to pass was communicated, then that's the standard. If the student met the standard, even if she barely did, she should pass. It's not wrong for the school to have a problem with shifting standards." Further down in the comments, Sleepy Feline says, "Not the a-hole. I had severe depression while I was a medical student. My university made allowances. They let me have time off when I needed it, and let me repeat the year when I unsurprisingly failed my final exams. What they didn't do was feel pressured to pass me when I wasn't ready. That would have been wrong on many levels, not least that it could have harmed my future patients. She hasn't been kicked out of uni. She's getting another chance at an internship to prove she can do the job. Yes, it sucks that her fiancé broke up with her. It sounds like she might be depressed. But being kind means giving a second chance, not being pressured to pass someone who shouldn't pass." Posted by Throw RABF Troubles. Titled, "Am I the a-hole for not going to family dinners because they fit the time with my sister's schedule and never mine?" I, 20 female, work full-time, 8 to 5, Monday to Friday. I am currently working from home due to world events. I also live on my own. My sister, 18 female, goes to college classes in the evenings and works a couple days a week. Ever since my sister has started her evening college classes a couple months ago, every family event is centered around her schedule. Her college classes start at 5 in the evening, so our schedules overlap. Meaning, if we have dinner, they eat before I am off work to coordinate with my sister, so when I get there around 5:15 to 5:30, I'm stuck eating alone while everyone has already ate or sometimes is already leaving. The issue in this matter is my grandma's birthday party. My mom put it together. Same sort of deal, my sister had class, I had to work until 5. I asked if instead of centering it around my sister's schedule, if she could be the one to eat early and we fit into my schedule this time. My mom said it made more sense to fit around my sister's schedule. When I asked why, because I literally couldn't think of a difference it would make, she said it just does. I spoke with my grandmother and she said she would wait to eat with me, but everyone else wouldn't. She also could not understand the reasoning behind it, but she said since she was not the one cooking or planning, she didn't feel she had much control over it. I told my mom that unless we could start alternating, fitting with my sister's schedule one time then mine the next, I would just start skipping out on family dinners and that it was not fun to always have to be the one eating alone. My mom told me I was being an asshole and immature about the whole thing. I just don't feel it's fair the way we are doing it right now. Mine and my sister's are the only schedules that need to be worked around. Am I the a-hole here? Editing to clarify a couple things. Weekend dinners are not usually an option as my grandmother still works on the weekends, so weekday evenings are usually better as she is not working. These family dinners are not a nightly thing, more of a couple times a month thing for things like birthdays, graduations, or sometimes just to eat, but it's not nightly. More like a couple times a month. My sister does not live at home either, she lives with her boyfriend, so she is driving to my mom's as well. Only adding this to clarify that they definitely could alternate between us since she is having to come over as well, they just don't. My parents are divorced and this is my mother's side of the family, so my dad has no input here. I do provide some of the food for the dinners as well. Sometimes I will bring a dessert or something, but usually I will provide some of the food that will be cooked, like meat to be grilled as an example, since I can't bring a side dish because everyone has already ate before I get there. Here's the verdict. Not the a-hole. It's perfectly natural to expect equal treatment from your mom. Well, guess now you know who the favorite child is. Your grandmother is cool though. Down in the comments, Candy2228 says, "Ntar, why go to a family event if you are going to be alone anyway?" Never Be Bored says, "If you can't do family gatherings, have your own dinner with grandma. Skip your parents and sisters since they apparently don't value your time. Alternating between schedules is definitely the fair thing to do, and not giving a reasonable explanation is because your mom knows it's not reasonable. Calling you an asshole is not because you are an a-hole. She gets defensive because she knows she's in the wrong. Not the a-hole." Now on to the next story. Posted by Gobble Me Swallow Me. Titled, "Am I the a-hole for telling my mom to stop treating my brother like a kid?" I, 21 female, recently had a big fight with my mom. My brother, 17 male, has always been my mother's favorite, and no, I am not just saying this, but she tells this to everyone around her. So since we were kids he has been coddled his whole life. She checks his computer, his phone, barges into his room without knocking, even tries to hand feed him at this age. Anyway, he is a teen and now absolutely hates that he doesn't get his privacy. Anyway, it's COVID and he had this date with a girl. In my place, COVID is handled good so we can go to cafes if we follow the rules. My brother even told my mom about the date and guess who followed him all the way? My mom. She sat in a booth nearby pretending to hide, and then my brother said he went to the bathroom and his date followed him. He said that he did it because he saw our mom there, and just wanted to kiss his date away from our mom's prying eyes. Anyway, they were there in for like 5 minutes when my mom barged in, physically separated them and yelled at the girl for ruining her baby and that she was a bad influence. It got worse up to the point the girl called our family bunch of creeps and left. My mom didn't stop. She was like, "Baby, did she hurt you? Are you okay?" And my brother, who never cried in public as a teen, called me crying to come pick him up because he was that embarrassed. I went and my mom wouldn't let him come with me, because she said only she can calm her baby. That's when I told her he is calm and just fucking mad at her because she is treating her like he is 10 and that's embarrassing him. All this happened in the parking outside the cafe, where my mom dragged my brother and his date out, and after I took my brother to my apartment, we talked and he doesn't even want to go back home because of many other incidents too. My mom is calling and texting, saying I had no right to act like an a-hole and embarrass her in public, and even my dad says my way of handling the situation is completely wrong. I still refuse to apologize, so does that make me an a-hole? Here's the verdict. Opie, your mom is a master of gaslighting. Seriously, how does she not see that her behavior is unhealthy? If she goes on like this, 10 years down the line she will be wondering why her baby son does not want to be in contact with her. Not the a-hole, Opie, your parents are the a-hole here. Down in the comment, ALS27 says, "At this rate, he's flying out that door the second the clock chimes midnight on his 18th birthday. Honestly, it seems his only chance for being a normal adult." Creeves9 says, "Not the a-hole. I'm really curious about what Mummy Dearest is going to do when it's time for your brother to attend university. If she keeps this up, he is going to either go to university and move across the country and never go back home after graduating, or he's going to go batshit crazy at university. Also, your dad needs to grow a pair." Badwolf7850 says, "My mom wanted me to be as secluded as possible. Wouldn't let me get my license, a job, socialize outside of school. When I started community college, she made me print my schedule and hang it on the fridge. She called the second I was out of class and demanded I stay on the phone until I got home. I ended up using that time I was at school for other things, like getting my license and getting a job, finding an apartment. The look on her face when I left was priceless. I failed that semester and couldn't afford to go back, but I don't think I would have passed anyways. She wasn't letting me study at school, and as anyone can imagine, my home life was awful and full of physical and mental abuse. It was really hard. She told me from a young age awful things would happen to me if I so much as went into a store alone and she was in the car. It took a long time for that paranoia she caused to fade. I'm sure she whines to literally anyone because her firstborn daughter has nothing to do with her and she hasn't met her only grandkid but doesn't know why." Now on to the next story. Posted by Keep Me Hidden. Titled, "Am I the a-hole for refusing to pay for my half-sister's plastic surgery from our family health fund? I try to give all details you maybe need, feel free to ask questions. All names are changed. I, 32 male, born from my mother Clara 57's infidelity, she is married to Greg. I have 4 siblings, A 36 female, B 34 female, C 26 female, D 24 female. My grandparents have raised me, because Greg refused to raise another man's child and there was no paternity test needed, because I was a mixed child, so my father has to be black. I never met him, don't even knew his name. My grandma was an American-Italian housewife, she was clearly my caretaker and for me my only mama. Grandpa was a very strict but also caring man and was always an idol to me. Both my grandparents were furious to my mother, not only because of her cheating, but because she abandoned me. This situation led to my grandparents' decision to make me the only one who inherit almost everything. My grandma died with 64 from a heart attack and grandpa died with 71 lung cancer. Grandpa had a life insurance. I was the only beneficiary, almost $300,000. I got the house I was raised in, marked value $280,000, and last Grandpa created a family fund with $400,000. I had to manage it. The rules for this fund are simple. I can use it only for emergency and only for me and my half-siblings. Clara and Greg are not included in this fund. Until now, I have paid for A's IVF for her fertility issues, nearly $40,000. Her health insurance hasn't covered it. And CS appendix removal, $15,000, health insurance has covered a great part. So far, no problems. But D plans to have plastic surgeries, a whole package of it, breast, nose, hips and more. It would erase nearly the half what is left in the fund. I refused because it is not an emergency. I would be okay with paying for plastic surgery if it is needed, example if an accident happened, but she just wants her makeover for her boyfriend. Of course, we had an argument which was not so pretty, and they threatened to sue me. They had sued me before, but Grandpa had made sure everything is totally fine. So am I the a-hole, if I stand on my feet? Mini update, I had a talk with everyone. Of my sisters it came out, they had no clue about DS plans. My mother tried to enable D and her lifestyle, and now my other siblings are very upset. I have invited everyone to my house and made sure again that the fund is only for health issues. It turned around to a screaming match between them. I just stood out of the conflict. So I didn't have any sleep yet and I have to go badly to my bed. Many of you asked why I have paid for A's IVF, simply because it affected her mental health. Many of you asked if D has deformations. No, she is just an average-looking woman for her age, but she wanted to be special. Again, thanks for all your responses, and have a great time. Here's the verdict. Not the a-hole. You have been managing the fund quite fairly, I should say. Even your other sisters know that D is totally out of line. Stand your ground, do not give in to your entitled sister's whining. If she wants elective surgeries, she can pay for them herself. Down in the comments, Mr. Saucy says. Not the a-hole. Stand your ground, that's not an emergency in the slightest, let them try to sue you. You don't need to give her anything for non-emergencies. Affirmative Robot says. You could be removed as the manager of the family fund if they could prove that you misused it, or spent it recklessly with disregard for the fund's purpose. Like if you did something crazy like blowing $150,000 on a luxury plastic surgery makeover. Can you imagine? A good lawyer could have you removed pronto. Not the a-hole. Don't give her a dime unless something goes wrong and she ends up in the ER or something. Even then, pay for the minimum, no extras. Posted by Victorious4433. Titled, Am I the a-hole for moving out when my stepsister ruined my Father's Day gift for my dad? I, female 16, live with my mom, stepdad, and stepsister, 18, and stepbrother, 20. I lost my dad to cancer when I was 13 years old. We were very close and his death was a major loss in my life. I wasn't able to keep much of his belongings because of my stepdad's insecurities and lack of sympathy and respect for me and my dad. It's sad to say that Mom moved on relatively fast. My stepsister and I share a room together. My stepbrother has the bigger room because he's a man, and as a result me and my stepsister are always in conflict. She wants me out during the day as she uses the room as her art studio. She recently accused me of stealing her tools and convinced her dad to get a lock, so now I'm being forcefully locked out and can't get in till after a huge argument and getting Mom involved. My stepsister had an argument with her brother and ruined his gaming console when he was out. He came into the room quietly in the evening, stood by the door and asked me to bring him my stepsister's acrylic paint set. I asked if he got permission, he said yes, so I gave it to him and went back to study. At dinner, my stepsister came downstairs yelling that her brother had access to her room and ruined her paint set. There was a lot of yelling and arguing. Stepdad asked how my stepbrother walked into the room when it was supposed to be locked. My stepbrother admitted I helped him out and brought the paint set to him. My stepsister went off on me, called an accomplice, then ran upstairs and took the gift I prepared for my dad for Father's Day. I picked up flowers I planted from our small garden that I take care of by myself, and prepared a nice wooden letter-shaped pot, used my dad's first initial and filled it with the flowers I picked and decorated it with ribbons. It wasn't that good, but it was like a floral letter. I planned to visit his grave and put the gift there. She damaged it to pieces. It was completely ruined. I yelled at her and kept crying. Mom and stepdad gave her harsh punishment and thought it was fixable, but I was so done. I called my uncle, who came and berated my mom and stepdad. Stepdad offered to fix it and punish my stepdaughter harder, but I packed my things to go with my uncle. My mom begged me to stay, but I refused and didn't respond when she kept calling, saying she did nothing to deserve to be shunned by me and my uncle, who told the family about what happened. The family told Mom not to come visit on Father's Day and are angry with her because I moved out over this. Am I the a-hole? Here's the verdict. OP, you are so not the a-hole. The fact is, your parents are quite sexist and this incident was in no way your fault. I say well done not enabling your step-siblings to terrorize you any longer. Down in the comments, Noranghim says. Not the a-hole. Your mom failed you. She failed to take your feelings into account after your dad died, failed to stand up to her husband when he failed to respect you and your dad, failed to protect you from his daughter and her unreasonable demands. The only thing both of them did right was punishing your stepsister for destroying the Father's Day gift you made. That isn't enough to make up for all of the other crap. If you stayed, I think your stepsister would have found some way to punish you for her getting in trouble for destroying the gift you made. Stay away if you can. Yes, your mother deserves to be in trouble with the rest of the family for everything that has happened to you. Further down in the comments, Shiny Aguman says, they also failed to teach their kids how to solve their conflicts correctly. I mean, you have an 18-year-old and a 20-year-old destroying each other's and OP's property as revenge. That's childish beyond belief. Now on to the next story. Posted by KFC2507. Titled, Am I the a-hole for walking out after I opened the gift my stepson brought me for Father's Day? I, male 37, have two stepkids, girl 11 and boy 16. My stepdaughter is the apple of my eye. I love her to pieces, but my stepson has a difficult personality. He never does anything with us, he never lets me help him with anything and keeps his distance from me. He also never tells me about his problems or achievements, and it's been difficult trying to establish a good bond with him like my stepdaughter. My wife says that's his nature, so I should stop pressuring him. He recently started spending time with me, but every time he'd pull a nasty prank. Like replace my shampoo or ruin my credit card or ruin my tires or rear lights. This caused a rift between us, especially since my wife says those are pranks. But I was worried for my safety and got paranoid from getting in the car or going to the supermarket with a ruined credit card. So I kept my distance. Father's Day, I took my wife and my stepson and stepdaughter to her parents' house for breakfast. I received a beautiful gift from my stepdaughter and didn't expect my stepson to get me anything as always. But he did bring me a gift. It looked like a nice gift in a box and was beautifully wrapped and introduced. I was so excited and happy because all I was thinking of was not the gift itself, but the fact my stepson is finally letting me be part of his life and remembering me on Father's Day, so it meant the world to me. That was already my gift, but I couldn't wait to open it and show him my appreciation and gratitude. Well, I opened the box and saw a stinky, old sock of mine that I've lost a couple of months ago placed inside. The look on my face said it all. My stepson encouraged me to show everybody what he's got me. I didn't want to, but my father-in-law took the box and pulled out the sock. He looked confused and my stepson started laughing hysterically, and so did others. It was an absolute horrible moment. I wished I could just jump out the window and run away from embarrassment. I just got up and walked out of the room silently while my stepson was laughing behind. My wife came to tell me that I overreacted massively and my stepson was just messing with me, meaning it was a prank. But he embarrassed me in front of the entire family, and frankly, I don't give a shit about a gift, but what he did felt so humiliating I almost cried. She yet said that I shouldn't have walked out like that and made it awkward since I'm the adult and should have handled this better. I left my in-laws' house and my wife and kids are still there. My wife is upset that I left and wanted to get some time alone and a good cry and remember my dad and try to keep my mind off what happened earlier. Am I the a-hole for this? Here's the verdict. Not the a-hole, OP. Your wife has got one thing right, you are the adult. You are also his stepfather. You should have handled his behavior issue long before it came down to this. Although you can use being a bit stricter with him, I don't think that makes you the a-hole here. Your wife, on the other hand, is a bit of an a-hole for minimizing your frustration. Down in the comments, Pamphlet Hamlet 21 says, "Not the a-hole. At first, I was thinking he was being 16. But the more I read, I'm horrified. And your wife is enabling this by taking his side constantly and allowing it to go unpunished. The kid needs therapy. These are not pranks. And you shouldn't have to put up with this. Your wife needs to change the way she handled him, or I would be out that door." Further down in the comments, Pope Godzilla says, "Damaging someone's car is not a prank. It's illegal because 1. It's an a-holish thing to mess with others' people's property. 2. It could potentially get you killed. And 3. It could potentially get someone else killed. This kid is literally playing games with the lives of other people potentially on the line. I don't know what part of that is funny, and I don't think any judge, jury, or cop in the USA will be laughing. Just think about it for a second. A car is literally a missile that weighs 3,000 pounds that instead of exploding on impact, it bounces off and changes direction until it's out of momentum." Posted by Sir Oliver. Titled, "Stealing from Locker, Enjoy Your Trophy." One of recent posts here reminded of story from my father. English is not my mother tongue, so please ignore mistakes in writing. He worked in a factory in Eastern Europe. An event occurred somewhere in 1980s. I know how weird it looks now in 2020s, but at the time it was pretty common that workers in factory would come to work drunk or they would drink alcohol at work. My father was not much different, and he would occasionally bring a bottle of brandy and keep it in his locker. These lockers were pretty easy to access without a key. You would need just a screwdriver or some piece of metal, and door would be easily bent and returned to original afterwards. The factory was working in shifts, and when you come next day, you would just notice that someone opened your locker and something is missing that you left inside a day earlier. As my father was bringing quite good booze, it would be missing next day. After who knows how many times his booze was stolen, he had enough of it and he decided to set a trap for thief. The brandy he usually brought was color similar to whiskey due to being matured in oak casks, and he took an empty bottle to the toilet and filled it with his urine and locked it back to his locker and went home after his shift was over. As shifts were slightly overlap, next day when he would come to work, people from previous shift were still there. He came to his locker and noticed that bottle was completely missing. He came to the workspace and loudly asked if anyone knows what has happened to the bottle with urine from his locker. He said that he had to go to medical check as he might have some urinary infection and he had to bring morning urine, but he had forgotten it in his locker day earlier. One of guys turned red and started yelling at my father how he dared to leave urine in bottle labeled as brandy, that someone could have mistakenly drink it and get seriously sick. After that his locker was not robbed ever, and that guy have got a new nickname, a piss drinker. Down in the comments, the true super genius says, "While I admit I don't know anything about Eastern European whiskey, if your father's urine was the color of the whiskey I normally drink, he did have a medical condition." Further down in the comments, Freyhall says, "Epic. I'm surprised your dad didn't say right after the culprit blamed him about the piss-filled brandy bottle. If you noticed, I never said it was a bottle labeled as brandy. I just said it was a bottle, but thank you for confirming that it was you that took it. Posted by Thresh Prince of KZN. Titled, F with me, okay. F with my dog, get effed. I originally posted this story on r/Nuclear Revenge but was told by many people to upload it here. I have 3 dogs, Tiki, Scruffy and Bailey, which my family has rescued from the streets and uncaring neighbors who couldn't care if the animal died. I also have 2 cats, Halo and Snowflake, both of which I adopted from the SPCA. I have Tourette's, ADD and OCD, and the tics from my Tourette's made me a prime target for bullying. At that point in my life, I was the shy weird kid in the class that never spoke. I had no friends and my companions were the only reason I woke up in the morning. One kid we shall call Andy, loved to feel strong, so he picked on me. He beat me up, made me feel like trash and sicked other trash human beings on me, one of which I later in my life became friends with. In general, I'm a patient little bastard and very vengeful. One day my mom brought one of my dogs, Tiki, to school so we could take her to the vet without driving back home because the closest vet was 50 kilometers away and Tiki needed a heart scan. My mom needed the toilet, so she left Tiki with me. Straight after she left, Andy and 2 of his goons show up. Andy, what's this spaz? Got a new toy for us to play with? Me, Andy please, she's very sick, I'm begging you please leave her alone. Andy, oh. But where's the fun in that? Andy proceeds to then pick Tiki up and toss her to his friends. Tiki had surgery and steel bars placed on a few of her bones, so it hurts her a lot if you don't pick her up properly. I can post the pictures of the x-rays. Because of the pain she is in, she snaps at Andrew and bites his hand. Andy, little shit. Learn respect. Andy then proceeds to chuck Tiki a solid 5 meters where she hits the ground on her side. I begin to scream and my mom starts to run from the bathroom after hearing my scream. Andy and his gang then run, laughing. My mom and I scoop Tiki up, who's wheezing and bleeding from her mouth, and take her to the vet while I tell my mom what happened on the way there. Tiki ended up passing away because of brain hemorrhaging from the blunt trauma. Scruffy waited at the front door of my house for 2 days waiting for Tiki to come home. Waiting. I tried to tell the staff what happened, but Andy was the popular kid and his parents were very close friends with the principal, so nothing was done to get justice. This whole ordeal caused me to become immensely depressed, but in the end, I was left a festering vessel of rage. No more quiet shy kid, no more little weak boy, no more. I devised a plan. I went to the gym for every morning at 4:30 until 5:30, then I would get dressed and go to school. This boosted my self-confidence and I soon gained a few friends who are still my friends to this day. I became a teacher's pet. I made the whole school think I was a loyal goody two-shoes teacher's pet, all according to plan. After 3 years I was seen by the staff as the epitome of a good and innocent student. No one would suspect me to harm anyone else. Andy had a scholarship to my school for playing sports and it was his passion in life. Would be a shame if someone were to end that. I told some people who I knew would take action, what he did to my dog, and how I knew some people that would pay generously for the service. Next week everyone is chatting in class. You hear what happened to Andy? Yeah, I heard someone mugged him and bust up his leg. A comminuted leg bone was what was left. The assailant smashed Andy's leg with a hammer so many times that the bone broke into more than 5 pieces. The leg was unsalvageable and had to be amputated. Bye-bye scholarship and all his favorite things to do in life. No one suspected me, the outgoing kind teacher's pet who never held grudges. Yes, definitely not me. Andy, if you are reading this, I have just one thing to say: see you in hell, cunt. Posted by Brie Guy 1965. Titled, He Would Have Made a Wonderful Meat Pie. This goes back to 1986 when I was trying to save enough money to get back to college. I worked at a bar 6 nights a week and was making pretty good money, but in order to save that money for college, I needed a cheap place to live. Fortunately, a couple of friends of mine, Bob and Steve, were spending the last 2 years of college living off campus and needed a roommate for the third bedroom. It came out to about $200 a month with utilities, so I was in. I moved in that August and set myself up in cheap furniture and decor from the local thrift shop. My roommates and I set up some ground rules. Since I was getting home between 4 and 5 in the morning, bringing home a party wasn't going to be an option, and since I was going to be sleeping until 3 in the afternoon, the volume would have to be kept to a low roar. But things went great for us for the first 6 or 7 months that we lived together. Bob was a diligent student who demanded quiet time for studying, and Steve was on the track team and a sports reporter for the local newspaper and had little time for partying. The weekends got a little rowdy sometimes, but the cops never got a noise complaint, and our house guests never hit a parked car when they left our house at 5 o'clock Sunday morning, so it was no big deal. That's when the snake came into the Garden of Eden. His name was Franklin. It upset him terribly if you called him Frank, so I only did it when he really pissed me off. He was expelled from college and didn't want to go home and face the wrath of his parents, so he asked if he could crash on our couch for a couple of weeks until he got a job and his own place. I was opposed because I would be waking him up every night when I came home, and I didn't like him. Steve didn't care. He thought that Franklin was a pain in the ass but felt sorry for the guy, so he was neutral on the whole subject. Bob was the deciding vote, and he said yes. Franklin moved in on a Wednesday in February, and on Thursday afternoon when I came downstairs for breakfast, he had brought in his Triumph motorcycle and taken it apart in the dining room. The frame was leaning against the wall, the engine and exhaust system were strewn all over the floor, dripping oil on the carpet. I was not quite awake, having not had my coffee, and I politely asked him, "What the F is this, Frank?" He replied, "I have to repair it before I get a job. If it's not fixed, then I can't get to work." I shook my head and went for coffee, hoping that Bob could get the security deposit out of Franklin before we kicked him out. A few days later, when I came home from work, Franklin had a large group of friends in the apartment, listening to Led Zeppelin on the stereo at too loud a volume for anyone to get sleep in the house and drinking my Jack Daniels. I went and grabbed the nearly empty bottle and turned to Franklin. "Frank, what gives you the right to drink this?" I was pissed. "It's in the kitchen. It's communal property, like the soup and the cereal." He looked smug, like he had argued before the Supreme Court and won. "The food and the booze are mine, idiot. I pay for it, I consume it. If you want any of it, then you pay me for it or you buy it for yourself." Again, I was furious. The bottle of Jack was nearly $20, and I had just bought it on Tuesday. It was nearly gone and was supposed to have gotten me through the week. Franklin shrugged as if it were not his concern and went back to entertaining his friends. The next day I put a padlock on my cabinet. It was only after Bob told him he had to pay rent or move out that he finally went and got a job, and he did that by using my name as a reference at bars that I had relationships with and no desire to hire Franklin as a favor to me. Incidents went on like this for the next few weeks. Some were minor. Some were repeats of what he had done before. For example, he invited one of the neighbor's daughters into the apartment for a drink and then proceeded to get her drunk and play strip poker. The girl was only 16, and the father was a member of the National Guard. He would have shot all of us if he had found out what was going on. Franklin had an affinity for firearms and began to sleep with his .38 Special under his pillow on the couch, which allowed him to suddenly wake up with a handgun pointed at whatever startled him. The final straw for me came almost 3 months to the day after he moved in. Bob was slowly noticing that the money that was coming out of the house fund, the money used to pay the utilities, the rent and miscellaneous bills, was coming up short. I was concerned that we had a house guest that was helping themselves to our cash, and Bob thought it was something else. When Franklin left for a work meeting, we went to his room and searched it, finding a cigar box with several $100s in it, including bills that Bob had marked. Bob had to go back on campus for an advisors meeting and told me not to confront Franklin until he got back, then left for his appointment. Franklin arrived home about 15 minutes after Bob left. My plan was to wait for Bob. I just wanted to play it cool and not do anything stupid. Franklin decided to push my buttons, telling me that his employer was going to give him a raise for doing such an outstanding job as a member of the security team. I listened to him brag until I couldn't stand it anymore. I casually asked, "Does this mean you'll repay the money you've been stealing from the house, Frank?" He lost all the color to his face, and then rushed me from where I sat on the couch. I worked at a bar as a disc jockey that backed up security. I knew a few tricks, and I was a big guy with some decent upper body strength. I was on my feet by the time Franklin got to me, and his plan to hit me in the face was spoiled by me getting on my feet. He swung and was immediately off balance, which I took advantage of by hitting him on the side of his neck below the ear and dropping him to the floor. I was angry. No, I was full of rage. My time at the bar had turned me into an alcohol-dependent madman, and I occasionally lost control of my emotions when I dealt with people who offended me. Franklin had offended me, and I was going to put an end to it. I kicked him a couple of times in the ribs, then grabbed him by the hair and broke his nose. I grabbed him by the ankles and dragged him to the kitchen in front of the stove. I opened the door to the oven, turned the oven on to its highest setting, and then shoved Franklin headfirst into the oven with the intention of gassing him to death. There was only one problem. It was an electric stove. It was the realization that the stove was electric that broke the spell. I hit him a couple of times in the face, realized my heart wasn't in it anymore, and let him go. He went down to his room. I went to my cabinet, got out my Jack and had a drink or two. Bob never questioned me about my assault on Franklin, and Franklin never mentioned it either. The house money was paid back, the bills were caught up, and all was well again. Franklin moved into a house with a couple of friends about a month after I tried to gas him. I never saw him again except in passing. 30 years later, he friended me on Facebook, and the first thing he mentioned was how funny it seems now that I tried to kill him. He's changed a lot, and so have I, and we chat, so I guess that what they say is true. Tragedy plus time equals comedy. Posted by Freebase. Titled, "Never mess with your IT guy, especially in the middle of the Iraqi desert." Backstory. In 2003, I was the Director of Information Technology and Communications on a project tasked with securing Saddam's major weapons storage sites throughout Iraq, performing a comprehensive inventory of said weapons, and then destroying what we'd found. I was based at one of the largest weapons storage sites in the country, so our mission there was monumental. Blowing up 100 tons of weapons 6 days a week, Scud missiles, anti-aircraft missiles, anti-shipping missiles, all varieties of rockets, grenades, and mines heavy to light, was going to take years. In order to accomplish this, we had to first build base defenses and secure an area the size of a small county. Once that was complete, we built a major support base in the middle of the Iraqi desert from scratch and all the infrastructure to support it. We're talking housing, cafeteria with full commercial kitchen, office buildings, electrical, water, and sewage systems, toilet/shower trailers, recreational facilities, an 8-bay full-service vehicle shop, and most importantly in my opinion, IT and communication systems, radio, network infrastructure, servers, VoIP phones, all connected to the outside world via satellite uplink. Story. All of these facilities housed explosive technicians, engineers, base support personnel, and as we had to provide our own security, private military contractors. If you're not sure what PMCs are, think Blackwater Mercenaries or look them up and you'll get the picture. Our PMCs were a mix of ex-US Special Forces, Army, Green Berets, Delta Force, Air Force Pararescue, SEALs, British SAS, French Foreign Legion, and ex-South African or Rhodesian Special Forces, Recce's, Cellar Scouts. All of them were now mercenaries, and in reality, so were the rest of us to some degree. Most of the PMCs were damn good men, But when you assemble a motley crew of individuals from such disparate backgrounds, you're bound to have a couple of bad apples in the bunch. This story is about one of those bad apples, and for the purposes of this story we'll call this bad apple Roid Rage. RR was one of the supervisory PMCs and oversaw the night watch from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I usually started my day around 7 a.m. and often worked until midnight, although those last few hours were generally spent surfing the internet and catching up with folks back in the US, as Iraq is 9 hours ahead. You're in the middle of the Iraqi desert, so there's not much else to do anyways, and other than the daily 100-ton explosion at 4 p.m., the internet is pretty much your primary source of entertainment. Since I was often in the office late at night, I was regularly alone in the office with RR for a couple of hours. As I previously mentioned, I managed the IT communications infrastructure for this project, and a vital component of that infrastructure were our telephones and voice over IP phone system. All of our sites used a satellite uplink to connect to a central VoIP server in Baghdad, which in turn connected us to the world. You could pick up any phone and dial a 5-digit extension to connect to any of our sites throughout Iraq or call any international number in the world. It was a pretty sweet setup, but it was also ripe for abuse. We tried locking down international dialing with various server rules and PIN schemes, but due to the inherent latency in satellite communications and the amount of bandwidth being consumed over a single satellite uplink at each site, we had trouble keeping those rules pushed to the phones on every desk. Ultimately, we had to scrap the restrictions as they were a real headache, and we went with an honor system. All international calls for business would be logged for review by the site manager each month. Anybody wanting to make a personal international call had to use their personal AT&T calling card, which they could top up online or with a credit card. After spending a few nights alone in the office with RR, I noticed a trend. RR would start his shift, check in with his men at their various positions on base, and then pick up the phone and talk in hushed tones for hours. It was a fairly large building and our desks were on opposite sides of the office, so I couldn't ever really make out what he was saying, but I could hear this constant murmur of him speaking to someone on the other end of the phone. It wasn't my business, however, so I largely ignored him. This went on for a couple of months, and as our site manager had to return to the US for a family emergency, the phone logs went unreviewed during that time period. A couple of weeks after the site manager returned, I was summoned to the conference room for a meeting with him and our senior US military and Department of Defense advisors. I could sense the tension in the room, and as I sat down, the site manager slid a manila folder across the table to me. As I opened the folder to reveal pages upon pages of call logs, he said, "Freebase, we know you're usually in the office late at night, and somebody has been making hundreds of international calls during that time and racked up thousands of dollars in phone bills. I hate to say this, but you're our prime suspect at this point, and with theft of this magnitude, we're going to have no choice but to terminate you immediately and bar you from working on any DoD contracts in the future. Unless you have some evidence to the contrary, we're going to have to move forward with termination and remove you from the country on the next supply convoy." I was shocked and sat in stunned silence for a couple of seconds, and then it hit me. Those calls were made by RR. Someone hadn't been using their calling card. I immediately protested my innocence and told them that every night, RR would get on the phone at the start of his shift and would still be on the phone as I left around midnight. They then summoned RR to the conference room and confronted him with the records. He begrudgingly admitted it was him and began to spin some bullshit story about being unable to top off his calling card because his credit cards weren't working and blah blah blah. All the while, he's staring at me with eyes of the fiercest degree of rage. We were short on senior PMCs at the time, so a call was made to Baghdad and a decision handed down that RR's employer was to immediately settle the debt with the US government, and RR's salary would be withheld until he worked off the debt with his employer. RR was also put on final warning that any future impropriety whatsoever would be met with immediate termination and removal from Iraq, as well as being blacklisted from working future DoD contracts. For an ex-US Special Forces operator turned mercenary like RR, that would forever spell the end of the DoD contracting gravy train, and he didn't take this threat to his livelihood lightly. Now, any rational person would admit they messed up, tighten up their game, and move on, but R isn't a rational person by a long shot, and the events that were about to unfold would highlight his irrational and sociopathic nature. After the daily demolition at 4 p.m., I was especially dirty, so I hurried back to the base to beat the evening rush on the shower trailer so I could grab a hot shower before the limited supply of hot water ran out. Upon entering the shower trailer, I noticed that I had the entire place to myself. I savored this rare moment of solitude, used the toilet in peace, disrobed, and stepped into a nice, much-needed, hot shower. Just as I was working a nice lather of shampoo into my hair, I hear the door to the shower trailer open. Boots clomp across the floor to my shower stall, and the shower curtain is ripped off its hanger by none other than a very pissed-off RR. Seething with rage, he grabbed me by the throat and yanked my wet, naked ass out of the shower and slammed me up against the opposite wall of the trailer, choking me all the while. Now, I'm about 5 feet 11 and a toned 175 pounds, but RR stands 6 feet 4 tall, weighs about 240 pounds, and is a steroid-enhanced muscle-bound mass of a man. RR's grip on my throat put ever-increasing pressure on my windpipe, and in my oxygen-deprived state, I began to panic. I thrashed about trying to loosen his grip, but in doing so I expended the limited oxygen I had and felt myself growing weaker by the moment. RR leaned in close to my face and said, "You think you can rat me out like a little bitch and there wouldn't be consequences? Let me tell you this, Iraq is the home of unsolved mysteries and bad shit happens to people every day out here. You better watch your fucking back, you bitch-ass motherfucker, because I'm gonna be coming for you from every fucking angle at every fucking opportunity from this moment forward." Just as I felt myself about to black out, he threw me to the floor and gave me a solid kick to the stomach, followed by another to the kidneys, and walked out, leaving me cold, wet, and gasping for air. I pulled myself up onto a nearby bench, caught my breath, and staggered back into the shower in shock. I pissed blood for 2 days after that beating. So much for a peaceful afternoon shower. I made my way to my quarters, sat on my bed, and thought about everything that had just taken place. My immediate thought was to report him to the powers that be, but given the circumstances and that he was always armed, I had to plan my next course of action carefully. R is a steroid-influenced individual and professional killer with his career on the line in the high-stress environment that is Iraq. My fear slowly turned to caution and then evolved into anger. Yes, I'd have to plan my next course of action and ultimate revenge very carefully. For the time being, I decided against reporting him and riding on any convoys he was on. I had been procrastinating setting up a private Wi-Fi network connection to my trailer, but I wasn't going to be caught dead spending any late nights alone in the office with RR in the near future, so I got that set up that night. The next night I left my trailer to use the bathroom, and as I passed the office on the way back to my room, I saw RR sitting at his desk by the window on the phone. Why is this guy on the phone all the time, and who is he talking to? Time to investigate. Investigation. I don't want to get off in the weeds in technical jargon, so I'll try to keep this as brief and simple as possible so you can comprehend my next course of action. All of our phones at our site were voice over IP phones and connected to the local network, which was connected to our satellite uplink. Every VoIP phone has a unique MAC address, a fingerprint if you will, which identifies it on the network. I had the master list of all devices and phones connected to the network so I could easily identify the phone R used every night. Network Instruments makes a nice little program called Observer which allows you to monitor all traffic on the network. It even has a cool little feature where you can flag a phone's MAC address and tell it to automatically begin capturing traffic on that phone from the moment the phone makes a call until the end of the call. Once the call is complete, it dumps the entire phone call to an audio file which you can then play back at your leisure. Pretty neat. Time to observe. Analysis. Over the next month, I amassed hours and hours of calls that RR made, and I finally found out who he was talking to. We already know that RR is a huge piece of shit, but the conversations I listened to took it to a whole other level of dutchebaggery. I sat at my desk every day with my headphones in, pretending to be listening to music, but in reality, I was digesting each and every call, taking notes, and marking timestamps of the good stuff. Here's what I found. RR is married and has 3 kids. RR also has a mistress in the US who is a stripper, and by the sounds of it, she's a world-class gold digger. RR spoke to his wife and kids about twice a week on average, but always kept the conversations brief because he was busy running the show in a very dangerous Iraq. As soon as RR would hang up with his family, he'd immediately call his stripper mistress. Let's call her SM. RR made it a point to call and talk to SM for hours every night. However, a douchebag has to have priorities, right? Most of the conversations were pretty nasty phone sex, but others were sprinkled with bits of gold like, hey, the next time I'm fucking you in your ass, I'm going to insist on an enema. That last time in Amsterdam I got a nasty UTI, and frankly, I'm tired of getting shit on my dick all the time. Yeah, of course I fucking hate my wife. She's a dumb bitch and I regret marrying her in the first place. The reason my kids are so fucking stupid is because of her shit genes. Yes, baby, I promise as soon as I get home, I'm going to divorce her and marry you. Promise. Another memorable conversation involved RR calling his wife and telling her that he'd have to cut his next vacation leave to the US short because he was so critical to the operations in Iraq, they wouldn't be able to run the place without him. This conversation was followed by an immediate call to SM telling her, yeah, the old lady bought the story hook, line and sinker. Yeah, I told you, she's a dumb bitch. Yeah baby, I'll book the tickets and this time we're going to Paris. We're gonna do it big. While these conversations were certainly deplorable, other conversations with SM were more dangerous in nature and severe violations of operational security. Given RR's foul nature, I can kinda understand why he felt it necessary to brag about operations, but man, you're talking to a stripper in the US who has no idea about any of this Iraq shit anyways. Make shit up if you must, but don't actually discuss the specifics of our operations and movements to inflate your pathetic ego. Some of these calls went like this, yeah, I'm the convoy commander tomorrow. Yep, large and in charge. I'm running a 20-vehicle convoy of flatbed trucks loaded with big as Scud missiles from Karbala to Amara tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and all 40 of the guys on the convoy report to me. These missiles are pretty volatile and sensitive and would be a prime target for the bad guys, so I came up with a plan to cover everything with these huge canvas tents we stole off some towel-head goat fuckers so we can disguise everything. Hell yeah, I'm smart baby. This is just one of the many calls of this nature, and the growing frequency of these calls ultimately forced me to cut my investigation short and move to the next phase of my plan. Phase 1 Action. I started studying RR's movements and which convoys he was on and where they were going. If I was going to pull this off, I had to be pretty spot on with my timing. I edited all the calls down to the good stuff and burned 2 CDs for 2 different audiences. RR ran a weekly supply convoy to Baghdad, and one of these CDs needed to be shipped to the US within a week's time. The only way to make that happen was to drop off one of them to DHL at Baghdad International Airport. They always stopped by there on their way back to our site to pick up beer and booze at the duty-free, so I packaged 1 CD up and asked a buddy on the convoy to drop it off at DHL for me and told him I'd pay him back when he returned. Once the convoy returned to our base, my buddy handed me the receipt and tracking information. Done. Phase 1 is complete, now it's time for Phase 2. Phase 2 Action. The following week, I packaged the other CD up and asked the same buddy on the supply convoy to drop that off to the DoD Country Director's office at the project headquarters. By this time, the first CD was out for delivery in the US and the second CD would be delivered to Baghdad HQ in 4 hours. Perfect. Not to pat myself on the back, but the disaster that was about to unfold for RR was the product of patience, dedication, meticulous planning, and flawless execution. The convoy made its way to Baghdad and the second CD was delivered to headquarters. RR made the usual pass by the airport for the booze run and then returned later that night. Reaction. The following morning the entire base awoke to an unusual sound. That unmistakable sound of the whirring of helicopter blades. The only time we'd ever had a chopper land was for a medevac, which was for one of our local Iraqi ammo handlers who thought an empty weapons bunker would be a good place to jerk off on his lunch break. That didn't go over so well, and he ended up getting bitten by a viper in his groin area. That's another story for another time though. So this Black Hawk helicopter, with overhead Apache escorts, lands, and these guys come running out asking for RR and the head of the PMC at our base. They unceremoniously roused RR out of bed along with the head of security and told them they needed to leave immediately for Baghdad. With just the clothes on their back and their body armor, they were whisked away within minutes. As soon as they left, the camp manager approached me and said we needed to have a chat with Baghdad in the conference room. We made our way to the conference room and got on a call with our local DoD advisors and the DoD country director in Baghdad. He had listened to the CD and wanted to commend me for blowing the whistle on RR. He also scolded me a bit for not blowing the whistle sooner on the first violation of Operation Security I had heard, but when I told him the entire story and the brutal assault I endured at the hands of RR in the bathroom, he softened his tone a bit. He concluded the call with assurances that RR would be dealt with swiftly and thanked me for my vigilance. Fallout. What follows was relayed to me by the head of security who traveled with RR on the helicopter to Baghdad. Upon arrival at the helipad at headquarters, a U.S. Army security detail led the two individuals into the DoD country director's office, and RR was confronted with the evidence. The director sat there with the senior advisors present and played the entire CD in front of RR and his superior. It was a heated one-sided conversation, and RR got ripped up one side and down the other. He was ordered to leave the country immediately and would be taken under escort to the U.S. Air Force PAX terminal at Baghdad International Airport upon conclusion of the meeting. He was also notified that he would no longer be eligible to work DoD contracts in the future. The head of the PMC was also excoriated for allowing this behavior to happen on his watch and notified that their security company would now be under investigation for any other possible violations. If the investigation unearthed additional violations, they'd be found in breach of contract, which would be terminated upon transition to a new PMC company. That company lasted another 7 months in Iraq. As RR left the meeting under escort, the director turned to him and said, "And tell your fucking wife to stop calling here and blowing up the phones. She's pissed off about something, but that's your fucking problem to deal with. You need to call her when you get to the airport and tell her to knock that shit off." Moral of the story? Don't fuck with your IT guy. PSRR, if you're reading this, I hope you're enjoying employing your talents for pennies guarding blood diamond mines for warlords in Africa or whatever hellhole you're stuck in these days. TLDR, some knuckle dragging, roid raging, meathead Merc abused our phone system in Iraq and ran up thousands in phone bills. When I was questioned under suspicion, I told the powers that be that it wasn't me, but was in fact dumbass douchebag. Meathead Merc assaulted me in the shower, choked me out, and thus began the journey of sweet, sweet revenge. Got dirt on him and sent it to his wife and sent the other dirt to Baghdad HQ, who immediately fired and ejected him from Iraq as well as blacklisted him from ever working a DoD contract again. Posted by Mobman111. Titled, "Bully Kids for Being Gay?" Time to put you in their shoes. In my school during the time I was there was a lot of social stigma with being a homosexual within a school environment. No one ever came out publicly due to the amount of bullying and general arsery that would follow, so it was a closed shop. I'm personally straight, a victim of bullying for reasons that aren't related to my sexuality, but a victim of bullying nonetheless. I knew I wasn't able to really stop this on my own, so I just moved on and tried to make their lives better through things like programming clubs. I'm well versed in my knowledge of programming languages. During my 3rd year there, I remember there was a particular little fucker whom I will brand dipshit for this story, and he was relentless. His parents were strict Christians, but not in the sense of love and peace, more like hate and repent for things out of your control. They would let him get away with bullying the LGBT kids due to the fact that those fags deserve it for going against God. The school would try everything to prevent him, and in their defense they did suspend him for a few days, but after the shitstorm his parents kicked up for this incident, he was acquitted almost every single time after this. One particular incident caught my eye, when he cornered a kid who was rumored to be gay without having even been confirmed, and beat the shit out of him, calling him a faggot and telling him to repent, more so sarcastically, not in a serious sense. I don't remember the details of the case, but I'm fairly certain nothing came about of it, due to the lack of evidence, but the victim was scarred. I know this because he attempted to swallow a bottle of pills due to his desperation to escape the pain. Frankly, I'd had enough. I began to work on a particular program which was my first RAT, allowing me to transfer files between computers, as well as run commands in admin on their PC. This was in the before times before people were big on e-safety, which essentially gave me full control. I sent them these rats in various forms through disposable emails so they'd have no idea it was me. I then began my planning, downloading various files of gay pornography and began to transfer it. I always made sure it was in places where they wouldn't ever look. Windows directory, sample videos, the usual. Then I waited. I remember it was a day when we were all in class together. I took out my laptop, sent a single command which was essentially a function to do one thing: open it all up. The greatest part about this exploit was that it also forced the sound to play through speakers as well as blasting it to full volume, close-ups of the most depraved, poorly drawn, scat, water sports, yahoe shit. Once that was all open, I just kept resending the command each time they closed it, making sure to only do it once no one could pinpoint it was being done automatically. Obviously the school informed his parents, and as strict Christians, who remember, hate and repent, were absolutely fucking furious. If I remember correctly, they disowned him and the local Christian community exiled him from the church, refusing to allow him back in. Without his parents, he had to live with his equally homophobic, but more accepting and less wealthy, aunt and uncle who constantly berated him for being gay despite his protests. It was rumored they signed him up for electroshock gay conversion therapy. At school, he felt the shitstorm these kids felt as well, being called gay, beatings left and right. Due to this he didn't pass any of his exams and as such was stuck at a dead-end job for 2 years of his life. Due to the events in his life up until that point, he took up alcohol as a suppressant for the pain, and as such was swiftly fired from his job for his ethanol-induced escapades. I'm not very sure where he is now, but I know that wherever he goes, he won't bully anyone ever again, and that is the branding I was looking for. TLDR, dips hit, you're gay. Me, no you. Edit, most people think I went too far. My intention wasn't really to punish him, more so show him what it was like. Whether or not that lasted to this day I don't know, but never saw him bully anyone ever again. Posted by Billiam201. Titled, I know it's your number, but... Another post on here reminded me of this one. Quite some time ago, my girlfriend and I moved in together, and had to set up all the things. Cable, internet, phone, etc. We got our home phone number, our 2 cell phones, and we were off to the races. Almost immediately, we start getting calls for an establishment that does custom framing and various other art-related things. Let's call them Expo for Art. Of course, we had caller ID, and we had friends that would call us, but inevitably if we didn't recognize the number it was someone wanting to find out if their order was complete, or their frame was done, of what their hours were, or any of 1,000 other questions. I'm sure anyone else who had had this happen will recognize this exchange. Sorry, that's no longer their number, this is a residence. Yes, I'm sure. No, I'm not giving you my address. No, I don't know their new number. Yes, I have a phone book, but so do you. Eventually, after 1,000 of these, and changing the message on our answering machine to say, this is not, I repeat not, Expo for Art. If you are trying to reach Expo for Art, please hang up, look up their number, and try that, because we aren't them. Eventually, I got my gazillionth call, and I asked the person on the other end of the line where they keep getting this number. Well, it's printed on my receipt. I guess I'll just call this other number. Any chance you can give me that one? Thanks. I call it. Hello, Expo for Art. You guys are still giving out my home phone number on your receipts. Yeah. So? Well, fucking stop it. It's been at least a year since you haven't had that number. At least cross it out or something. That's a pain in the ass. I'm not making my employees do that. So you're the manager? I'm the owner. So let me see if I have this right. What was your name again? Let's call him Fred. Fred, have decided that it's too inconvenient to cross my home phone number off of your receipts, so you're just going to keep giving it out. Yep. What are you gonna do? Sue me? Maybe. Whatever. I've got shit to do. Bye. I called a lawyer. Didn't really have a leg to stand on. I went to the store and asked for Fred. Fred's not here. He's hardly ever here, really. You want me to call him? No, I'm fine. I know this is going to sound odd, but is there any chance I can see one of your receipts? She picks up a receipt book and shows it to me. Sure enough, it's got my phone number at the top, above another one. I say, I thought so. I couldn't get you at the other number, some guy yelled at me, and I didn't have my old receipt, so I had to come down here. We've been having that happen a lot, ever since Fred decided we didn't need 2 phone lines. But he had just bought like 20 boxes of these receipt books and business cards, and he's too cheap to buy more until they run out. I'd hate to be that guy. Yeah, that's gotta suck. So I went home, and hatched my evil plan. Next phone number I didn't recognize. Hello, Expo for Art. Hi, this is Mary Smith. I dropped off a thing last week to be framed. Is it ready? Let me check. Yep. We finished it this morning. I hope you don't mind, but we decided to upgrade the matting because of the weight of the piece. It's the same color, and won't be charging you for it, since it was my decision. Oh, thank you. I'll be down to pick it up later today. What time do you close? I look down at the business card, with my number and the hours clearly marked 11 to 4. Take your time, we'll be here until 7. Thank you so much. Can you tell me how much that was? $19.99 plus tax, so $21.39. Wow, that's cheap. Are you sure? Of course. If anyone has a problem, tell them you talked to Fred. Okay, see you around 6. See you then. Thank you for calling Expo for Art. For weeks I kept giving out completely random information. How much is a 36 by 48 matted frame? Let's say $24.99. Wow, that's cheap. How much to have it done custom? How they want it? Custom is an extra $10, so $34.99. Wow, that's cheap. I'll be right down. What was your name? Fred. See you in 10, Fred. How much to have the entire front page of the New York Times from 9/11 mounted and framed? $33.99, unless you want our special, proprietary newspaper frame and mat service, only $49.99 and guaranteed for life, only at Expo for Art. Tell them Fred sent you. I can only imagine the number of pissed off people who showed up to pick up orders that weren't ready, and when they finally were given a price way higher than what Fred had told them over the phone. Eventually, someone let slip that they called the number on the receipt, and that's what Fred had told them. Fred was not happy. Hello, thank you calling Expo for Art, this is Fred. You're not Fred. I'm Fred. Are you trying to put me out of business? Why, Fred, whatever do you mean? Someone has been giving prices to my customers, and telling them their orders are in when they're not due for weeks. Well, Fred, who called them? Nobody called them, they called us. Then what's the problem? If someone called you and got pricing information, that would seem to be your problem. They didn't call me, they called you. Well, how would that happen? Your number is on my receipts and business cards. My. It seems to me there's a very simple solution here. Take my number off of your receipts and business cards. Do you have any idea how much promotional materials cost? Is it more than it costs to do these jobs for the prices you're quoting? Is it more than it costs to lose customers, or less than that? This is extortion. Call it what you want, Fred. The choices and consequences are entirely up to you. A week later, hello, Expo for Art, this is Fred. I've ordered new receipt books and cards. Can you please stop this bullshit? Sure. By Fred. ETA, holy smoke. By far my most liked post ever. Thanks for the awards, everyone. I didn't even know platinum was a thing. Thanks, guys. Edit 2, since a lot of people have asked this, no, I didn't let him off the hook until the call stopped, but it was only a week or so after he called me back. He must have paid for expedited shipping. Edit 3, cross-posted on r/malicious compliance. Posted by Niclo2K. Titled, either be fired or accept a massive pay cut. Okay, I'll take the firing. I worked for company for 14 years. I loved working there for 12 of those years. There were two main parts to the job. The first part was the sales side of things. This was away from the office, in the customer's location. This involved quite a bit of driving and on a couple of occasions, flying abroad to work face-to-face with the customers to deliver a high-quality product. We weren't the cheapest, but we were the superior product. And I was the best employee when it came to delivering the product. I consistently got rave reviews from customers for my personal style when it came to delivering the product and executing the customer's vision. I got a huge amount of repeat business and I got a lot of new business through word of mouth with customers recommending the company based on their experiences with me. The second part was the office side. This was my weaker side. I hated cold calling potential customers with numbers I found in the phone book. When it came to answering the phone and speaking to potential customers who initiated contact with us, I was fine. But I wasn't great at making the calls. This was my only real not great part of my job. So, in the office I wasn't asked to make any calls. Instead I prepared product, designed new product, trained new staff members. Ended up being one of the biggest parts of my job. I was also the problem solver, helping out whenever and wherever. Filling in for sick employees whenever I could. I liked the owner and I liked the manager. I liked all the staff who were around me. All in all, it was a great job that I was really good at and took pride in. The company had been doing so well that the owner had slowly expanded over the 12 years since I started working for company. I had joined about 3 months after he started, so I'd been a part of this expansion. I worked out of my nearest office, but often traveled to other areas to train their staff. I was loaned out as it were to other companies to help train their staff. At one point I was a guest lecturer at a university teaching medical students how to deliver complicated explanations to people who don't have the base knowledge that you yourself do. After 12 years I was on a decent salary. Not massive, but I was happy. Then the owner decided to sell off part of the company. He was selling the area where my local office was. He told me he would love for me to remain as his employee, but I would need to work from a different office. This was either require me to move, or to quadruple my daily commute. The other option was to remain working from my current office but with a new boss. I chose the second option. Before the new owner bought the company, she worked alongside the staff for a couple of weeks to see how we operated. This was before any of us knew she was about to buy the company. As far as we knew, she was just another employee, and she was shadowing us to learn. She came with me on assignments in the field and saw my abilities. When the sale was announced and we were informed that she was the new owner, everyone was very surprised. She made some sweeping staffing changes. The manager left to start her own business, since the new owner was also going to be the manager. A lot of staff were let go. The secretary, myself and a couple of newer hires were kept on. The new hires were on the lowest wages. Anyone who had got to a decent level was let go. Since almost everyone was on a 0-hours contract, she was able to do this. Whilst technically it was a new company, for the customers it was the same old business. The company still had the same trading name. The only real difference was that there was a new owner and the registered business name was now different. As far as the customers were concerned, nothing had changed. My job for the first few months after the sale was to train up the remaining staff to replace the more experienced staff members who had been let go. I recommended a couple of new hires who I had experience working with in the past. I was open and honest with the owner, and let her know that one of them was a close friend and one of them was my girlfriend. Both were more than qualified for the work and both were happy to join. My friend had recently come back to the country after a year of traveling, whilst my girlfriend could only work during school holidays. The owner gave them both interviews, then hired them, since we needed the staff. Over the next 2 years, business started to fall. The reason was simple: the new owner decided to try and maximize profits by increasing prices whilst decreasing the quality of the product. For new customers, this wasn't noticeable. They just thought we were expensive and the product wasn't the best. But for old customers who had been with us for 10+ years, they immediately noticed. They were being charged more and were receiving worse quality. So the owner doubled down and increased prices again. 95% of our old customers left us. New customers almost never became repeat customers. Complaints skyrocketed. Whilst all this was going on, our staff turnover rate was ridiculous. People left after a few months when they realized that the minimum wage they were being paid wasn't worth it. Under the old owner, the average hourly wage for new employees was around 2.5 times the minimum wage. This made people care about their jobs and want to keep them. My girlfriend quit. My friend remained, but was looking for something new. Then I got a phone call. The owner needed me to come to the office. This was unexpected. I had just finished working on location with a customer. My next customer was in 2.5 hours. It was a half-hour drive away. The office was about an hour and 10 minutes away from both locations. If I drove back to the office, I would have about 5 minutes in the office before leaving. My mileage was paid above my regular salary, so I was saving the company money by doing this. Also, parking was a nightmare around the second location, so I intended to get there as early as possible to find parking, then read a book. The manager didn't care. She needed me to return to the office. So I did. I arrived back to be handed a letter by the owner. It was informing me of a disciplinary meeting to take place in a couple of days' time. I could bring a witness along if I so desired. This knocked me for 6. I was the best employee. I read through her list of complaints about my performance and started working on my defense. At the meeting, I declined to have a witness. Instead, I decided to record the audio of the entire meeting on my phone without informing her. Where I live, this is legal and I didn't need consent. The boss's witness was her friend who she had met at yoga and hired for an office role, firing the secretary who had been there long before the takeover. Every point she raised I could counter. They ranged from the week. You were unavailable to work for a week in August. I booked a week's holiday so I could attend my cousin's wedding on the other side of the country and turn it into a holiday. To the pathetic, you were late for work on the 12th of May. Is that the day my car broke down and I called the office to let you know? I don't know. I do. Here's the receipt from the garage dated May 12th. To the downright lies. This one I can't write as a quote. Basically, she accused me of gross misconduct for breaking health and safety laws in the way I was delivering a product for a customer. I hadn't broken health and safety laws. I knew exactly what I was doing since, as I've mentioned already, I had been doing this for 14 years at this point. She had witnessed me do this on multiple occasions and had never mentioned it before. Because it wasn't an issue. She even had me train staff in this specific delivery method. Because it wasn't an issue. She finished her list by telling me that she doesn't want to lose me, but she can't justify keeping such a poor employee at my current salary. I had two choices. I could either sign a 0-hours contract and work for minimum wage, or she could fire me with 2 weeks' notice. I countered that she would have to give me 12 weeks' notice, since my contract guaranteed me 1 week's notice for every year of employment, up to a maximum of 12. She argued that I had only been her employee for 2 years, since before then I worked for the previous owner. I informed her that with how the business takeover had run, it counts as continuous employment. I quoted the exact law and code that backed me up. She asked for a 30-minute break in the meeting to let me think about her offer. She went to call her lawyer. When she came back, she informed me that since she was firing me for gross misconduct, she didn't have to give me any notice at all. If I wanted to remain and move to the 0-hours contract, I could do that today. But if I didn't, then she would have to fire me. But because she was nice, she would give me the 2 weeks' notice. I asked for a couple of hours to go home and think about this. She allowed this. I knew the reason she wanted me to remain for at least the 2 weeks was because one of our few remaining bigger customers was set to have a product delivery from me in that time. They would only work with me. The owner had tried sending other staff in my place on several occasions, and each time there had been problems. It wasn't the staff's fault. It was just a very difficult delivery for a very specific customer which needed to be perfect. As a result, this customer would only deal with me. I called the office and spoke to the owner. I declined the offer of a 0-hours contract and said I would be leaving. She then said she was giving me my 2 weeks' notice. I declined her offer of 2 weeks' notice. I informed her that if I was being fired for gross misconduct, then surely I cannot be relied upon to safely deliver the product. Therefore, it would be best for everyone involved if I didn't return to work. She panicked and said that she needed me for those 2 weeks. I feigned ignorance and let her know that I was just thinking about what's best for the company. After all, you can't have unsafe staff delivering your product to your customers. However, if she wanted to rethink the gross misconduct accusation, then I would work my 12 weeks' notice. They were her options. 0 weeks or 12. She chose 12. For those 12 weeks I worked the same way I had for 14 years. I didn't coast. I didn't slack. I didn't badmouth the company on my way out. I continued to train new staff. I continued to deliver the product in my own, personal, exceptional way. I also got in touch with a lawyer who was a specialist in employment law. For those 12 weeks the owner barely spoke to me. She resented the fact that I knew my legal rights and didn't just believe her lies. She hated the fact that I could defend myself. She was petty. She accidentally dropped my mug in the kitchen, breaking it. Most petty of all, she paid for every member of staff in the office to have a spa day, except me. I was asked to work my day off to answer the phones whilst everyone else was being pampered. Nobody knew I hadn't been invited until they arrived at the spa and I wasn't there. Here's the thing, I'm a big fat bearded guy. I have no interest in a spa day. If she had offered it to me, I would have thanked her and declined the kind offer. But by pointedly excluding me, she was making herself look terrible. For the last 2 weeks I was training up my friend to basically take over from me. At the end of the 12 weeks my final day came around. The owner had nothing planned. Not so much as a card after 14 years, 2 for her. The office assistant manager who had become a friend had got me some presents, but had to give them to me once the boss was gone, for fear of reprisals. The day after my final day 2 things happened. The first was my friend who I had been training up to replace me quit. He was on a 0-hours contract, so required no notice. He was unhappy with her treatment of me, and was unhappy that she expected him to do my job for minimum wage. He hadn't informed me of his plans to leave, and I only learned of it when he knocked on my door in the middle of the day when he should have been at work to let me know. The second was the owner received a letter informing her that I was bringing legal proceedings against her for unfair dismissal. I had arranged this with my lawyer to be delivered the day after my final day. According to the office assistant, she went pale and started crying, before leaving the office to call her lawyer. She refuted my claims for constructive unfair dismissal. Said it was gross misconduct. Tried to come up with some more reasons for firing me. But the truth was that the company was making less money because of her business practices, and I was the highest and only salary. I had evidence that I was a great employee. I had evidence that she asked me to move to a 0-hours contract. She initially tried to deny this, since the gross misconduct fabrication makes no sense if she wanted me to stay. But once my lawyer provided hers with a transcript of the entire meeting along with a copy of the recording, she knew she was fucked. Still, she let the case drag on for over a year. I think she hoped that the legal fees would lead to me dropping the case. Little did she know my lawyer was working on a no-win, no-fee basis, whilst hers wasn't. She ended up settling out of court. The aftermath. The office assistant who had become a friend quit a couple of months after I left. She hated how I was treated and didn't feel safe working for such an untrustworthy boss. Several former customers contacted me personally to inquire why I was no longer with the company. Apparently the owner was telling them that I just quit. I informed them that I had been fired for cost-cutting reasons. They moved their business elsewhere. Several offered me jobs. One went so far as to offer me a part-time job and to pay for me to attend college to earn a degree required for them to hire me full-time. This was a lovely offer, but they were one of the customers who were a bit too far away to commute, and I wasn't ready to move. In the end, I found a new job in a different industry where a lot of my skills transferred over. Currently earning more than I was, working less hours and for better owners. The business is floundering. COVID left the new owner desperate for cash. She cancelled orders but refused to refund customers' money, citing an act of God clause in the contracts. The business's Facebook and Google reviews have tanked. Most staff left. The business is still afloat, but barely. TLDR, owner fired me as a cost-cutting measure. I sued and they ended up settling out of court, whilst the person they planned to replace me with quit. Posted by Texan Native 71. Titled, Do Shady Thing, Fire My Boss, Hide Millions from Your Client? I don't think so. Forgive me if this is long. This happened a while ago, but it's still so fresh in my mind. I left college with a business degree in one hand and no job in the other. And like so many colleges, the promises of alumni willing to give jobs to graduates could not have been further from the truth. So I had to seek out my start from the bottom. I found a good job in operations at a company. Had a great boss, who taught me pretty much everything I needed to know. Work was great and the money was good. I need to explain how the business worked so you can understand how the plan worked. The corporate office was in California, and we were not. There are a lot of things that went on at this company, and I can't get into all of them because it would just take away from the story, but let's just say they had a very Stratton Oak-Morn vibe when it came to sales. I started out worked in operations with some of the smaller clients, but with some help from my boss, was able to climb the ladder rather quickly to the point of being over all the operations and order processing for the firm. We had a very large client, 90% of the company's business. The way it worked was we had two sets of sales representatives, TSRs and CSRs. TSRs were the heavy hitters who reached out to the other big businesses and tech firms to extend their warranties on a product. They made real good money. The CSRs were more of the mom and pop crowd and the inbound sales calls for those that wanted to extend their warranties. The representatives were all given codes that associates the client's files with theirs, so if someone did a renewal automatically, they would get paid as it was their client. Pretty sweet gig. The client hired the firm to be the middleman for their B2B as they handled all of their everyday clients. For every $100 that came into our firm, 18% or $18 would be for the company and the rest would be sent to the clients with the warranties activated. Most of the clients paid by CC or PO with a wire transfer, but there would also be a good amount of checks each week that would need to be processed. A little while after I started, the client check portion was now going to be overseen by one of the sales managers. Didn't really faze me because I was working on the smaller accounts. Since we were a publicly traded company, all the sales representatives' orders had to go to operations to be fulfilled. They weren't allowed to process them on their own. This is when things started going downhill. My boss at the time was given temporary access to the financials as they were hiring a new CFO and he had a background with it. We went to lunch like we had done plenty of times before, but he seemed different. When I asked him if something was wrong, he told me that something looked off with our biggest client for one of the accounts. He wanted to make sure before he said anything to the higher-ups. While this was going on, I had been offered the chance to be our new compliance officer, which means I would need to make sure everything was on the up and up. Soon after, I come in to find out that my boss was just terminated for a multitude of reasons, all of which had to be untrue because he was a pretty well-liked guy with not just with the company but with our client as well. As I log into my terminal, I see that before he left, he had given me admin access to his files. Here's where things started to pop off. Remember those checks that clients were sending in to renew their warranties? Well, we were cashing them all right. Apparently we just weren't adding those renewals to their products in the system. That would have triggered a payout to our client who, as you remember, would be getting 82% of that money. Instead, they were cashing the checks, keeping the money, and using the interest in the accounts to cover losses in their collections department. It was wild to see that this was happening, and something had to be done. So I hatched a plan. First things first, secure a new job cause it won't be a fun place to work after this. Done. My previous boss knew of other companies that would scoop me up. Put in my notice, and stated in my exit interview that I just couldn't be a part of what was happening, even though HR was in on this. I wanted it on the record. Next, get approval for overtime for all the operations crew to come in on a Saturday. They arrive early Saturday, obviously not too thrilled as to why they are there. But when I explain that if they complete the task, not only do they get their overtime, but they get nice bonuses, they were much happier. They spent the entire day applying all of those checks dated back years to the client accounts. We are talking millions of dollars. When all the sales representatives arrived Monday, they were shocked to hell. Not only did they meet their weekly goals before picking up the phones, they made their monthly and quarterly goals too, 2 weeks into the new quarter. Cheers. Partying. Yelling. Screaming. Celebrating. Except sales management. They went from being really excited, to skeptical, to confused, to oh shit in about 2 hours. They realized where it must have come from. Because not only did the company hit all these sales, since it had been over a day, the client came into work Monday to see a very nice payday in their system as well. And like anyone, would have questions, and says they are coming out to congratulate the team on such great numbers. So management starts scrambling because they can't figure out how this happened, and all under my boss's old login. On my last day I arrive and in the lobby, I've got my Boxster for the last of my things, etc. Guy walks up as is waiting for the elevator with me and we strike up conversation. He notices my box and jokes about getting fired, and I just tell him I had a great opportunity come up so I decided to leave before shit hits the fan. We laughed. Really nice down-to-earth guy. He realizes we are getting off on the same floor. He asks if I work for X, I say yes. He asks where, I tell him operations, and he reveals that he is the CEO of our client. We go our separate ways. Client shows up and there is a big party. Afterwards, the client says that they would love to get a breakdown of where most of the sales came from so they can allocate more money to that department. Management says sure, but it made up a lie about how they can't share client payment info due to regulations, blah blah blah. Cue my exit from the company. 2 weeks go by and I get a phone call from a number I don't recognize, so I let it go to voicemail. When I get off work I checked it, to find out it was the CEO of the client where I used to work. He has had something come up and would like to talk to me. Of course I'm nervous as hell, but I call him back and he picks up on the first ring and we get to chatting for a bit and he finally just asks me, "Why did you leave?" I tell him I had a great opportunity come up. He doesn't buy it and says that apparently my comment about shit hitting the fan really stuck with him and he thinks something more is going on. So after a little more prodding from him, I tell him, just look at collections and that's all I can say. He thanks me and I hang up. 2 days later, he pulled the plug on the account. Apparently my old company tried to threaten him with a lawsuit for pulling the account 3 years early. He replied with, "That's fine, because then I show the courts that I have the evidence that you committed fraud." Corporate came in and cleaned house. All of management was fired within the day. 1 month later, my friends and I had a very memorable trip in Vegas, all courtesy of our old client. Edit, wow. Very surprised at all the responses and positive messages. Thank you all very much. Epilogue, best part, I guess this should have been part of the story. My old boss was an adopted kid, treated his adopted parents great, while their real kids didn't, and when they passed, they left him all their money. All of it. This was about 2008. He was in a weird place, because he loved his parents and was really close to them. He went to his church to pray for his parents and for what to do with this new landfall of money. He loved working, but didn't need to anymore. He left the church and went to a bar. He sits next to a guy who is a developer and has run out of money to finish his development because it's 2008 and no one is loaning money. They get to talking and he thinks, maybe this a sign. I'll speed this up because I've got to run to work, but he invests in the guy's development by buying all the houses and now lives off the residual income from all of them being rentals. Life sucks because so many people do shitty things and get away with it, that it's great when good things happen to good people. Posted by Corvin. Titled, Time for My Own Tale of Revenge. It was either here or over on r/malicious compliance that I saw a post that reminded me of this tale, which happened quite some time ago now. Apologies in advance for the long read. Many years ago, my now ex-wife and I decided to upgrade from the small single-story home we were in, and find something with more space for us to spread out. We had her late-teen son living with us, our 3 Rottweilers, plus I needed a dedicated study for my work. I'm in technology, and often worked from home. After months of searching, we found our dream home. Beautiful, 2-story, 4-bedroom plus study, with huge amounts of space everywhere. Seriously huge. The laundry was bigger than my bedroom growing up. The quality of everything was amazing, square set walls, polished Tassie oak flooring, floor-to-ceiling windows in the living areas, and 2 walls comprising commercial-grade bistro doors that opened up an entire corner of the house onto the covered, outdoor entertaining area. The standard of the build was no surprise. This was a display home up until it landed on the market. We were to be the first people to live in it. I'm going to gloss over months of details and pain, but we had problems with the place from day 2. Literally. On night 2, the plumbing under the ensuite shower gave out and leaked through the kitchen ceiling underneath it. A couple weeks later, during a monster storm, 3 of the light fixtures upstairs started leaking water. A month later, we noticed rust starting to show through the rendering on the corners of the house. There were heaps of smallish, easy-to-fix problems, but the kicker was that the balcony adjoining the master bedroom, at the front of the house, actually started to sag down. To the point that it was unsafe to go out there, due to risk of collapse. We were mostly amenable and nice through most of this. The vendor was a small business, and we had no interest in making his life any more difficult than it already was for a small business owner. But, conversely, we were pouring a lot of our hard-earned money into the mortgage, and we wanted what we paid for. But, for his own reasons, the builder just kept making it difficult to get things fixed. There was a seemingly endless list of excuses for not turning up at agreed times, a non-stop torrent of blame directed at his subcontractors, and just plain shitty behavior, like dodging our calls and not responding to our emails. Of course, we started proceedings with our state's Consumer Affairs Department. After all, we were entitled to a statutory 7-year warranty on a new home. But that process takes time throughout which we were forced to endure issues like water leaks, a dangerous balcony we couldn't use, and a whole host of other issues that meant we weren't enjoying our home. There shouldn't have been any dispute about his responsibility to fix these problems. He just chose to be a dick about it, and make us go through the government process, presumably thinking we would give up before he was forced to do anything. At around the same time, we started getting the occasional knock at the door, only to open it and find a couple standing there with a brochure in their hands, and our house pictured on the front. The first few of these conversations ended with us politely explaining that this was no longer a display house, it was our home. Without exception, they all apologized profusely and went away. After a month or so of this, I started to wonder, how was it that people still thought our house was a display home? I went looking, and discovered that the builder's website still had our address listed for display. Despite repeated calls and emails, they steadfastly refused to remove our address from their website. This irritated the shit out of me. These people would often come knocking on weekends, because that's when people go house shopping, right? But our pleas for the builder to update his site simply fell on deaf ears. Enough was enough. An idea had formed. Did I mention I was in technology? First thing I did was scrape their website, and set about the task of creating my own version of it, using their exact look and feel. I highlighted every single problem we'd found with the place. Every glamour shot was replaced with shots of the exact same feature, but showing the problems we had, rust showing through the rendering, water leaking from the light fixtures, close-ups of the sagging balcony, etc. You get the idea. By the time I was done, I had what I felt was the perfect alternate version of their site. One that highlighted every single defect in the home, as well as calling out all the problems we had in dealing with the builder. I even included testimonials that were simply copies of the bullshit emails and texts we received from the builder, avoiding his responsibilities and making lame excuses for not fixing our problems. The headline testimonial was the one where he responded with, "So just don't go out onto the balcony," when I pointed out the clear safety risk it represented. After getting a lawyer friend to check through each page to make sure I wasn't opening myself up to some form of legal action, I put the site up for hosting on some cheap and cheerful hosting provider Google told me about. I also registered a close but not close enough to be sued domain name to reach it. The next step was to create some actual collateral for execution of my plan. After all, there was no point going to all this effort unless I was actually able to direct people to the builder's website. So, I took a copy of the brochure for our house, and set about creating my own version of it. Similar principles as the website, no contact information, except the website address. My website address. By this time, I'd made good friends with a few of my neighbors, and we'd taken to sharing a beer or two most nights on our front lawns. And wouldn't you know it? One of them was a manager for a local print shop. Given he already knew what hell we'd been through with the builder, he took very little convincing to print off a run of my brochure for me, on beautiful paper stock, nice and glossy. Professional. I think it cost me half a dozen beers. Then came the final step in my plan. I waited. I waited for eager couples to turn up on my doorstep, eyes wide open in wonder at the beauty of the home they were going to pay the builder for their very own copy of. For the next 6 months or so, whenever one of these couples would turn up and knock on my door and explain their purpose, I'd let them know that this model home was selling so quickly that the builder had asked if I could hand out his updated brochure, so potential buyers could go online and look up whatever the current display home address was. I don't know how many brochures I handed out. Of the 100 my neighbor printed for me, I probably only had 2 or 3 dozen left, but I know I also handed a bunch out to mates so they could have a laugh. I'd estimate close to 40 prospective buyers got a copy of my brochure. And I reckon at least 15 to 20 of those came back to thank me for warning them. A few of them had already signed conditional contracts, and managed to get out of them one way or another. I don't know what happened to that builder in the end. I split up with the missus not too long after, and she sold the place not too long after that. At the time of writing this, the builder's website is gone. The domain still appears to be registered in the company's name, and their state business registration still appears to be active. As best I can tell, he's no longer at the last known address for the company, and I can't find any mention of the company online that isn't at least 6 years old. Hopefully the fucker is out of business now, and hopefully the few dozen people I helped sidestep the pain of dealing with him were the beginning of the end of his shitty little enterprise. If you stayed this long, thanks for reading. Cheers. Edit, Dog Tax. Posted by AwayThrowX1X. Titled, My beloved wife cheated on me and my daughter isn't mine. How can I move forward as well as shake angry feelings? This is gonna be a long one. My wife and I were married for 21 years. I figured it was one of those miracle marriages because we barely argued, seemed we will always be the best of friends, etc. Well, our 15-year-old daughter received a 23andMe thing for her birthday from a friend. And of course, it said we weren't related. Only her brother and I seemed to be related. So I did a paternity test afterwards and lo and behold, she wasn't my fucking child. My ex-wife cried and pleaded for me to hear her out, but I just went numb to her. It would be one thing to cheat, but to find out the light of my life isn't even to related to me killed me. Don't get me wrong, I love my daughter with all of my heart. She's still my daughter no matter what. But what's scaring me most is my seemingly vindictive desires. I've never been like this, and I know it's out of anger, but I want her to suffer so bad. The kids absolutely hate her. Which on one end helps that desire, but I know that deep down, she is still their mother, and I don't really want them to hate her. Her parents and siblings all are mortified at her. Her sister hasn't spoken to her in a couple months. Again, this makes me feel great, which in turn scares me, because I don't actually want her life to go into shambles. But I can't help feel euphoric when I learn something in her life is falling apart. Both children are living with me, as they don't view their mother in a favorable light at all right now. I'm thinking about having the talk about them going to talk to her, because as of now, they refuse. The part that breaks my heart the most is that my daughter seems to be overcompensating her roles of a daughter. She makes sure to tell me how much she loves me, and is, in essence, being the perfect daughter. But I can tell it's because she knows that she isn't biologically mine, but she desperately wants me to know how much she values me. I'm actually going to talk to her tonight about that. To tell her that she doesn't have to act differently. I just really want to know how to shake the sadness and angry, vindictive feelings. I want to move forward as well as help my children move forward so they can worry about school and being teens. Please, any advice will help. TLDR, wife of 21 years cheated on me and my 15-year-old daughter isn't mine. I've been having sadistic, vindictive feelings towards her and I want to put those away as well as help my children move past it as well. Update, beloved wife cheated on me and my daughter isn't mine. I know it's been some time, but it actually destroys me to write about it. For some clarification, we did talk about it, and it was in the fair. I just didn't want to write the part out because it physically makes me shake with anger to talk about it. My daughter and I are both in therapy. I am taking the advice of my therapist and the many commenters on my last post, and am not going to force my kids to talk to their mother. They are old enough to understand the gravity of the situation and have their own feelings about it. Because of this, they will need to take their own time gathering up how they feel in dealing with it. The pain my daughter is going through seems to have healed somewhat. I've gotten her to fully believe that my love for her will never change and that she will always be my daughter. Her pain seems not to be about our relationship anymore, but her newly found trust issues and trauma from the family being broken apart. She's also confided in me that she feels like it's all her fault, and that if she never brought the kit home, the family would still be together. I hugged her and let her know that none of this was her fault, and that she was only looking to do something fun with the family. She had no idea what would happen and that she should never blame herself. I've had one conversation with my soon-to-be ex-wife, in which she begged and pleaded with me to forgive her and that she would cherish me for the rest of her life. She said it was stupid, it meant nothing, and that she regrets it 100%. She also said that she believes our love can withstand it. I told her that if our love was that strong, she wouldn't have felt the need to find sexual comfort in someone else. She is currently staying with her parents. I've communicated with her sister, and apparently, she's borderline suicidal. They are trying to get her help, but she refuses, as the only thing she wants to do is see me and the children. Because of this, I'm waiting to serve her the divorce papers. I don't want to add on any more things to destroy her mental health. I've brought up talking to her with my son and daughter, to which they adamantly refused. I am going to respect their wishes and give them their own time to cope. I have this nagging feeling that she does not actually care about how it made any of us feel, and that she only cares about the fact that she's about to lose her picture-perfect family and the comfortable life that we had, and that it's her fault. I have no desires to try to fix the relationship and move forward. That's all for now. TLDR, daughter and I are in therapy. Kids have no desire to talk to their mom. Soon-to-be ex-wife is a wreck and refuses to get help. Update 2, beloved wife cheated and my daughter isn't mine. It's been a long while, so I figured I'd give you guys one last update. My daughter is doing a lot better. Our relationship seems to actually have gotten stronger since this whole thing. And it's not even act. We hang out more and have a lot of heart-to-heart talks. She went to her mother's parents' house to see her mother. From what I heard, she mostly just talked to her grandparents and didn't say much to her mom. My son is also doing fine. His experience is different from daughter's because he actually is my child. He's still angry at his mom for betraying me, but is coming around and talked to her more when they went to visit her. He's still hesitant because he's a protective little brother and hates that his sis felt awful. I actually give him credit for keeping her sane. He talked to her, went on walks with her, and he didn't give up on her. I told him I was proud of him for sticking by her side. I also talked to him about how he feels because I realized that during all of this, I kind of dismissed him since he was my bio child. But he's going through his stuff too, and we have many talks now and he's in individual counseling. As for my wife, I tried to do marriage counseling to see if there was any hope. I tried to believe her that it was the only affair and that she didn't know she was carrying her child. But it didn't work out. I couldn't look at her or speak to her in MC, and when I did say something, it was just about how bad it made me feel. She would sob and beg on her knees, but it didn't change anything. I couldn't believe that she'd never cheated again, and I believe she knew it wasn't her child but just chose me because I was the safest bet. I'd been played like a fool and I'm done with it. I served her at her parents' house and she flew into hysterics. She screamed at the top of her lungs on the ground. I couldn't understand a word she was saying, but I just felt numb to it. Her mother tried to beg me to forgive her, but her father just walked me out to the front, and without saying a word, gave me a firm handshake and nod with a face that said, "I understand completely." We got into contact with my daughter's her bio dad and got his medical info. She said she doesn't want anything to do with him because she already has a dad. I'm not gonna try to talk her out of it either. Though, I have a fear that she'll want to contact him one day and become very close with him, and that I'll fade out. But I try to push that to the back of my mind and only let it out during individual counseling. That's where we are now. Me and the kids are trying our best to push through. This will most likely be the last update unless something big happens, which I doubt. Thank you to everyone who helped me and checked up on me. I really appreciate all the help and advice. Posted by K111 Titled, I'm fat, not weak. I would like to start off by saying that when I get angry, I get furious. My sister calls it Hulk mode, where I get huge doses of adrenaline. My rage does not mix well with the fact I don't mind watching people suffer. I'm not saying I'm a bad guy, I help people when I can. But if someone does me or someone I care about wrong, I enjoy their pain with little to no remorse. Anyway, onto the story. I am pretty much the unofficial caretaker of my youngest sister, let's call her LS. I'm 17 and she is 6, but as her big brother and me looking around early to mid-20s, I'm constantly mistaken as her dad. I always walk her to and from school. Her elementary school is about 3 blocks from the high school, so there are constantly kids my age walking by our house. Now, I love my LS more than anything in the world and am very protective of her. We love playing together and building snowmen in winter. This is exactly when the incident took place. We live in Indiana, so we get some crazy snow. We were building a snow person family while I, the big strong brother, would pretty much stack the snowmen on top of each other while LS balled them up. I never leave LS alone outside for more than a few seconds, and always keep an eye on her. We have a fenced-in yard, so it should be fine, right? Me, keep playing, I'll go get some hot cocoa. LS, EA. Q piece of shit, a kid I knew well but never had the pleasure of meeting. As I make the hot chocolate, I hear LS crying. I just figured one of the 4 snowmen fell over or something like that. Me, LS, calm down and come here, the hot cocoa is ready. She doesn't come and doesn't stop crying, but then I hear laughing. I step outside. There were 3 kids, all around my age. We will call the one I knew from school SH1, SH being for shithead. The others will be 2 and 3. The snowmen were destroyed, sticks and scarves were thrown everywhere, but that wasn't important. SH1, well, isn't it Humpty Dumpty, is this your dad? LS doesn't answer, and I guess SH1 doesn't like that. He slaps/pushes my LS down with a strike to the face. Her nose all red, she falls and hits her head on the sidewalk and starts screaming. Blood coming from the back of her head. At first, my heart stopped. My first thought and biggest fear was brain damage. I rushed over to LS and tried to pick her up to take her inside and call an ambulance. SH1, 2 and 3 had walked up behind me without me noticing. I was too distracted. As I started to lift her, SH2 grabbed my arms, causing me to drop LS, luckily into the soft snow this time. Me, let go of me, you mofo, she is hurt. As SH2 held me, SH3 picked up a pile of snow and just piled it on my LS face. By now my LS wasn't screaming, it was a weak whimper, and I was so scared she was going to die. Black. Most people say they see red, or time slows, but not me. I knew exactly what I was doing, but it was like I was watching it on TV. I bit SH2 on the thumb, drawing blood. He yells as he lets go and jumps back. I lunge forward. Now, I'm fat. I'm 6 feet on the dot and about 330 pounds. But I have also played football my whole life and knew how to use my size. I slam into SH3 as hard as I could, taking him to the ground. I was on top of him and was bringing the hammer down. I don't really know how many times I hit him, but he lost teeth, shattered his nose, and lost eyesight in one eye. My knuckles were shredded raw, but I had so much adrenaline in me I didn't feel it. In fact, the only reason I stopped was because I heard a thump. I didn't really hear it, I felt it. Then I felt liquid trickle down the back of my head. Blood. SH1 had hit me over the head with a brick. Now, this hurt after the fight, but again, when I have adrenaline pumping through me I feel nothing. I charged at him as he raised the brick again. He must not have expected my speed with my size because he jumped back and hesitated. I didn't. I slammed him into my dad's truck. He dropped the brick and I punched him in the gut. He bent over and I lifted my knee to meet with his face. He falls to the ground. I pick up the brick. I walk beside him and put it on the sidewalk. I put his hand on the brick, no resistance from him. I stomped as hard as I could. He screamed, louder than anything I've heard. I do the same with his other hand. SH2, after seeing his buddies pummeled, ran. Turns out he called the cops and said I killed his friends. I walked over to LS who was breathing, but it was weak. I called an ambulance but the only thing I muttered was she's hurt and our address. When I hang up, I pass out. I woke up handcuffed to a hospital bed not knowing what happened. Apparently, I broke multiple bones in both my hands and needed stitches on the back of my head. My LS was fine, she had just lost a lot of blood. SH1, 2 and 3, not so lucky. The only thing I did to SH2 was bite his thumb. I guess I didn't know that I almost bit his thumb off. SH1 had serious hand injuries needing multiple hand surgeries on each one. I later found out he lost 3 fingers and can't use his right hand. But SH3 got the worst of it. He lost his sense of smell, lost eyesight in one eye, bit a hole in his tongue, fractured his jaw, lost multiple teeth, fractured his skull, and had major swelling on the brain in which he barely survived by the skin of his teeth, at least, the ones he has left. After a bit, a nurse came and checked on me, saw I was awake, and went to get a cop. The cop came in and asked me a bunch of questions and I told the truth, I don't know, it was black. He then uncuffed me from the bed and said that they watched our security cameras and, while a bit excessive, I acted in self-defense of myself and others. Some might ask how I can describe the fight so well if it was all black, unreal, like watching TV. Another good question would be about the beginning, where I said I enjoyed others suffering if they deserved it. To answer both those questions, I have the security recording. The police took the footage from the monitor, but the camera also gets sent to our phones. I love watching it, I've probably watched it 1,000,000 times. I only have 2 regrets about the whole ordeal. I let SH2 get away with only a small injury. My last regret? I don't think they suffered enough. The footage showed the fight lasted less than 1.5 minutes. I wish it would have been hours. Edit, thanks for all the support. Y'all are gonna make me blush. Edit 2, holy shit. My first ever post and I get a gold medal, thanks. I won't post the vid but I'm more than willing to post pics of where it took place. My Discord is domwildman2821. Edit 3, 1000 upvotes. Thank you all so much, I didn't expect it to blow up like this, especially my very first post. Down in the comment, deleted user says, yeah, you did the right thing. It really sucks, but sometimes pieces of shit have to learn the hardest ways possible. I had a friend of mine who had poison oak and a sunburn on his neck, so they had to put medicine that created blisters to help it heal. Well, a neighbor kid thought it would be funny to slap and explode all the blisters on his neck, made my friend scream and drop to his knees. When the kid started laughing, I lost it and lunged at him. Punched the crap out of his face until he dropped to the ground, kicked and punched him a few more times. I was not done with him. I picked him up and pushed him in the general direction of his grandma's house. She was a nice lady and I liked her, her kindness probably saved his life. I beat the crap out of him and then tossed him closer over and over up our driveway, across our double lot, and across the street into his grandma's yard. Watching the little puke crawl inside felt good. My friend's older brother, 16 at the time, was glad he didn't have to risk jail to beat the shit out of the good, and their family made me dinner. Now, when I tossed the kid on the grass, I told him he wasn't allowed off his grandma's property except in a car to leave the area. I was not kidding, and I totally hold a grudge. Next summer, he got his bravery back and totally thought I have forgotten. I chased him back to her yard and made sure he stayed there. I really wanted to just go beat the crap out of him again anyways, but I did like his grandma even he was a piece of shit. He started taunting me, jumping off into another yard then running back to safety. I eventually caught him, beat the crap out of him again, and tossed him back. I like this game, let's keep playing, I told him. He moaned and crawled back inside. Never saw him other than getting into or out of his parents' car, and he ran both ways. They must learn hurting people is not funny or something you can just get away with. Posted by Atlas Black. Titled, They Framed Me. They fired me. And that's how they effed themselves into a divorce, a prison sentence, and a handful of deportations. This is a long one, but if you stick with it until the end, you will learn how I was framed and fired from my job, and accidentally set off a chain reaction that led to a staff overhaul with several managers being fired or moved to other restaurants, the general manager being fired and getting a divorce, and one of the managers being investigated by the FBI and ultimately arrested, as well as several of the workers being deported. Here we go. I used to work at an upscale restaurant owned by a large corporate entity that owns several different restaurant brands. I worked there for about 3.5 years before they eventually fired me, but more about that later. First, I want to give an idea of my role there. My role at that job was a little of everything. Since the day I started working there, I took it upon myself to learn as much as possible. I was very persistent with management when I wanted to learn a new department. I had started as a server, but eventually had worked my way into different departments and job titles, like carry-out, hosting, bartending, bar backing, banquets, catering, and deliveries. My singular goal while working there was to make myself available for as many hours as possible. I was being paid about $12 an hour, though that fluctuated if I was working as a bartender or server and making tips. Eventually, it was noticed by management how I fit best into one of the non-tipped positions. I was so good at it that they decided to try me out as an unofficial supervisor over the team that worked in carry-out, catering, and deliveries, as those were all one department. I knew this was going to ultimately mean a few less hours since I would only be working one department, so I negotiated with management to increase my pay by about $1.50. Since I was taking on additional responsibilities, they were satisfied with the pay increase. I wasn't trying to get as much money as possible, I just wanted to be able to pay my bills and still have a little money left over for fun. I was living in the highly taxed city of Chicago, which is in the already highly taxed state of Illinois, so it was pretty difficult to make ends meet and still have money left to enjoy my life. I am a person of simple pleasures and I can enjoy things for long periods of time, so it didn't take much money to be happy. A video game could hold my attention for several months, sometimes even years. I had a family pet that I had brought with me to Chicago, so that counted as an extra expense. Not long after I started this position as the unofficial supervisor, I got a girlfriend, so I was also going out more often and spending money on her. With my position and some smart budgeting, I was able to afford all of this. The money wasn't an issue, but management had a high turnover rate, so the incoming managers often did not know what the department entailed or how important hours were to workers of these departments. Eventually, it was noted that our current general manager was going to be fired and replaced. The incoming general manager was supposed to be some rock star when it came to improving restaurants. We looked up his name and found him as the first search result on Google. But the entry wasn't some glowing review of his work ethic or of his impeccable ability to improve the way a restaurant runs. It was actually a mugshot and a police report filed for repeated domestic abuse. This is important later. We'll call him Harvey. Shortly after Harvey came in and started making changes, one of our best managers gave her resignation. She refused to work with him, and like a fucking oracle, told us to expect lots of sexual harassment, misogynistic comments, and for him to eventually run this place into the ground. Not long after she left, our general manager began replacing our current managers with hand-picked people that he had worked with in the past. Eventually all but one manager was replaced. That manager was the kitchen manager. We will call him Fredo. Fredo had been there since I had started working there. He seemed to be something of a chameleon, as in his values and ethics seemed to change depending on who his boss was. Honestly, I sort of applaud his survival instincts, but ultimately see him as a suck-up and traitor. Harvey never really replaced the manager for our department, so we ran without a lot of oversight. Unless you count me as the supervisor, we didn't constantly have someone breathing down our necks about how things should be done. Our department had some hiccups here and there, but it still ran really smoothly. Since we did not have our own manager, we often had to radio for a manager to come help us out on things that needed a manager card for approval. Fredo would always be the one to answer these calls since the kitchen was closest to our department. Over time, the new team of managers started to see Fredo as the manager of our department as well. However, the hourly team that worked there still saw me as their supervisor. This meant that any time Fredo was trying to make changes that would ultimately hurt us, the team relied on me to mitigate those disasters or to negotiate with Fredo to let us do our jobs the way we had already proven worked really well. Over several months, Fredo and I would butt heads dozens of times. He and I were constantly arguing about how important hours were to the workers in this department. He had it in his head that we should be living off of tips like servers, but since most of our orders were carry-out, they came in through Grubhub, and Grubhub doesn't tip. We didn't have a lot of deliveries in a day, and the tips we got from those were maybe $10 if we were lucky. But splitting $10 4 ways doesn't add up to a lot. It just showed that Fredo had no clue what he was talking about. Eventually, we had a meeting with our Harvey, Fredo, and all the workers of this department. It was marketed as a chance to voice all our grievances and concerns with the changes they wanted to make with no chance of retaliation. So the workers did exactly that. They talked about how Fredo was trying to cut hours even though he isn't our actual manager. When it was brought up that they were attempting to hire someone to be the manager, the team suggested that I take over since I had already been supervising them and running things smoothly for the last several months. I was also the one that management consulted with when writing schedules, as I had an understanding of the days some workers could and couldn't work depending on their school schedules or family life. I could see at the moment it was suggested that Harvey and Fredo made the decision on the spot that I had to be gotten rid of. Although they didn't say it, I could see the look they gave each other, and instinctively knew that my days at this place were numbered and my job was going to be getting the axe one way or another. They made a bunch of promises to us about not cutting hours. They told us that they would stop sending all but one person home early and only leaving one person to clean everything and close up by themselves, as this wasn't a small department and it was simply too much for one person to do alone while still meeting health and safety standards. They promised that whatever hours we were scheduled for, we would work. We weren't trying to be unreasonable, so we told them that we usually have 3 or 4 people scheduled to work our department. They could cut 2 of them early, but we always needed at least 2 people here to help close properly. The promise was made that they would always have at least 2 closers. However, only about a week later, they started sending all but one person home early again every night. One night they tried to do it while I was scheduled as the closer, and we had just returned from a massive catering event and there was an unbelievable amount of cleanup left to do for one person. When Fredo came in and tried to send everyone except me home, I stepped up and told him that he was consistently breaking the promise he had made to us during the meeting. He looked me square in the face and told me to stop complaining about it, and if I was going to keep trying to talk to him about him breaking his promises, he could easily find someone who could work my shifts. I quickly realized that this was an assassination attempt on my job. He wanted me to press it further. So I backed off and started cleaning. I ended up having to stay way late, and that meant overtime pay anyway. I got a write-up for that, since we aren't allowed to work overtime without a manager's approval. When I refused to sign the write-up, pointing out that I had tried to explain to Fredo that I wouldn't be able to clean up all that stuff alone before my scheduled shift ended. I was allowed to leave without signing the write-up, but only because the HR rep that was present at the time wasn't one of Harvey's cronies. Skip ahead to the day I was fired. It is important to note at this point that I always came into work an hour early. Since we lived in Chicago, food was expensive. However, at our job, we were allowed to have as much free soup and bread as we liked. So I would come into work 1 hour early every day so I could have some soup and bread for lunch before my shift. But on this day, when I walked into the kitchen to get myself some soup, one of the line cooks told me that he had a dish that had been cancelled after he cooked it, and Fredo had told him to give it to someone. He assured me Fredo had already comped it and that it was free to take for whoever wanted it. It just so happened to be my favorite appetizer, so I happily took the free food. Not long after I got to my booth, both Harvey and Fredo approached me and asked me if I had put in a ticket for that food. I told them that the line cook had given it to me and said it was the cancelled order that Fredo had already comped. Fredo looked dumbfounded and said he had no idea what I was talking about. So Harvey told me, "I think you know that's theft. Go ahead and finish the food and then grab my stuff and go. That's the last meal you'll be having here." I tried to explain to them that I had been given this food by the line cook, but they refused to listen, so I offered to take them to the kitchen to clear it up with the cook. But by the time I had gone back to the kitchen with them to talk to the line cook, he had already gone home for the day. I had no choice but to gather my stuff, say my goodbyes, and head home. On my way out, I told the people working my department that afternoon what had happened, exactly as it happened. They were shocked and angry, but mostly sad to see me go. I decided that on my way out, I would stop by the accounting office and pick up any tips that may have been dropped for me that week, just to make sure I didn't get screwed out of that money. Before heading down, I had the gut feeling to just set my phone to record, and I stuffed it into my pocket with the camera rolling. Although the video was entirely black since it was in my pocket, I did manage to get a pretty muffled recording of Harvey and Fredo's voices through the door, discussing how things had gone as planned, and that they had been trying to get rid of me ever since the meeting with my department. I knocked on the door and they hushed up before opening it. They asked what I was still doing there, and I asked for my tips. They gathered what was in the safe for me and handed it over. Despite my anger rising at what I had just heard, I decided not to burn this bridge just yet. Because perhaps I could fucking nuke it later. I offered a handshake to both managers, thanked them for the opportunity to work there, and left, making sure to pull my phone out of my pocket and record the front of the restaurant, with the sign showing its name and logo. Working in a restaurant, you learn to always cover your own ASS. It's true for most jobs, but something was just telling me I would need this all later. If I was being accused of theft, I wanted to be able to prove it wasn't true if ever came up in future job interviews. Which is exactly what happened and where this all started going nuclear. On the train ride home, I sent some messages and made some posts on some local groups on Facebook saying that I had just been fired and that I was looking for a job as quickly as possible. By the time I got off at my stop, I had already set up an interview for later that day. I was offered the job about 5 minutes into the interview, but after going over the details, it didn't sound like it was for me, so I turned it down. I interviewed a few other places and found one that was a damned good fit, with a hefty pay increase compared to my previous job, and I wouldn't have to deal with customers. It was an auditing job for a logistics company. However, during the interview with the manager of this job, he mentioned he had already called my previous place of employment and spoken with the general manager, Harvey. Harvey had told him that I had even fired for theft. Luckily for me, the manager I was interviewing with asked me to tell him more about that, and he was willing to let me pull out my phone and find the recording. I asked if the voice in the video was the same as the one he spoke on the phone with. It was. That was confirmation enough for him that I hadn't made a fake video. He listened to the two managers in the video admit that they had set me up, and watched to the end when I showed the front of the restaurant, complete with the logo and name. The manager interviewing me, who will start calling Dean, hired me immediately and asked me to send him the recording. I did. I thought that was the end of it. About 7 months later, after settling into this job quite nicely, HR sent out a welcome all our new team members email, which listed all the newest hires, some facts about them, and had pictures of them all. They sent these out every time they hired a new round of people. One of them, Thomas, was a former co-worker who worked with me at the restaurant. We had worked at the host stand together, so I was pretty glad to see someone I knew and liked coming onto the team. I sought out his desk and went and said hello, and asked why he left the restaurant. He hadn't left willingly. He'd been laid off because the company was under investigation. It had started as a relatively small matter. The corporate entity that owned the restaurant chain had received an email with an attached video. My video that had been filmed from inside my pocket. That was cause enough for corporate to send someone to investigate internally. Thomas was pretty surprised that I hadn't heard anything about it, since there had been numerous attempts to get in touch with me. As soon as he said that, I logged into the old email I had used when I first applied for the job at the restaurant. I had at least 24 emails asking me to come in to discuss my employment and termination. I never replied. I just didn't care enough anymore. I'd also changed my number since then, so they hadn't been able to contact me by phone. Thomas continued explaining that before corporate had sent someone, Harvey and Fredo had talked with my department and tried to offer them all a small pay increase to spin corporate a story about how I was incompetent at my job and failed to live up to my duties. The day the corporate auditor showed up, there had been a small exodus of people from my old department. They quit on the spot, in front of the lady from corporate, and made sure to rat out Harvey and Fredo before leaving. Strike 1 for both of them. Strike 2 came a couple of days after Audrey showed Harvey and Fredo the recording that had kicked all of this off. They denied it vehemently, but there was no mistaking Harvey's voice. It's unique. Not only that, but the video also picked up their voice and mine when we shook hands and had a friendly parting of the ways, which was something they had already bragged about to Audrey, thinking it made them look better that we were able to part on good terms. This wasn't the actual strike 2. That came when it was clear they needed to be separated, so Audrey sent Fredo to work at another restaurant owned by our parent company, and temporarily demoted Harvey to manager. This tore them apart. They had once been an inseparable evil team, but the pressure of the investigation must have pushed them over the edge. They ended up at each other's throats, on Facebook, on a public post on the company page. The post had since been deleted, but Thomas explained it as the following. Fredo had been pictured in the Facebook post on the restaurant page, and Harvey made a passive-aggressive comment about how Fredo shouldn't even be in the picture since had been moved to another restaurant due to misconduct. Fredo saw this comment and said something along the lines of, "At least when people Google my name, I don't show up as the guy that punched his wife." To which Harvey responded, "Very funny from the guy who is cheating on his wife with Janet's sister." Fredo replies to that by saying, "Like you haven't tried with half the waitresses. They all have stories about you trying to fuck them." The post was deleted, but not before it had been seen by Audrey the auditor. That was officially strike 2. Strike 3 came the next day when Audrey started interviewing the female waitstaff and bartenders, seeing if any of them could confirm that Harvey had tried to make a move on them. All of them were interviewed separately, several of them had similar stories. Every girl that confirmed Harvey had made a move on them all said he had offered to be their sugar daddy if they would send nudes or stay after closing to fool around with him. Harvey was fired. But that isn't the worst of it. Audrey the auditor wasn't just some random woman from corporate. She was the old regional manager for this area, and had personally hired Harvey's wife as the general manager of another restaurant in the city. So she called up the restaurant Harvey's wife worked at and told Harvey's wife everything she had learned from the female waitstaff. We learned later that they had gotten a divorce over him trying to cheat on her after she'd already given him a second chance to change after he had beat her. I don't know what compelled her to give him a second chance after something like that, but she sure didn't give him a third. After firing Harvey, the line cook who had given me the food was interviewed by Audrey. I don't know how it came up, but at some point, he had let it slip that he was an illegal immigrant. She had his file in her hand, with an Illinois ID and social security number on file, so this confused her and she pressed him for more information. It turns out that Fredo had some connections and had his own miniature black market going on where he would have fake social security cards and IDs made for the illegal immigrants he was hiring at reduced wages. It had been going on for at least 4 years. Needless to say, this is a felony. With the potential PR nightmare that she was likely dealing with, she felt she had no choice but to alert the authorities. Local PD enlisted the help of the FBI since some of the evidence led them beyond the jurisdiction of the local police. Fredo was arrested and quickly gave up the names of the people working that he had sold social security cards and IDs to. I'm not sure if he gave up all of them, but he did name drop about 14 people, and of those 14, at least half were deported by the time Thomas had been let go. One of them was the line cook that had given me the food the day I was fired. Thomas went on to explain that it had all started with me being fired, but I never sent that recording to corporate. I'd only sent it to Dean when he hired me. I asked him about it, and he told me he had sent it to his wife, since she was a lawyer. He wanted to see if I had a case to maybe sue my old job, since what they had done was wrong. But he also remembered that when we had first talked about it, I had said I'm not the type of person who would try to make millions off an entire company because of the mistakes of 2 assholes. But I'd also said that it would be pretty sweet to see them lose their jobs too. So his wife had been the one that sent it to the legal team at the corporate HQ of my old restaurant job. My boss showed it to his wife, who forwarded it to the real head honchos of my old job. They were both just trying to get 2 scumbags fired for what they did to me, but ended up pulling a thread so long that it didn't end until there were sexual harassment accusations, revelations about managers cheating on their wives with girls related to people they had placed in positions of authority, a divorce, mass layoffs pending investigations, a staff overhaul, an FBI investigation into what could be considered black market dealings of falsified government-issued documents, and at least a half-dozen deportations and probably as many as 14. I don't know if this counts as nuclear revenge, as I didn't actively pursue it. But Thomas ended up showing me that even if it wasn't revenge, it was definitely nuclear, and the crater it had left was massive. Edit, apologies for the run-on sentences. And that's all for today. Feel free to share your opinion about the stories, down in the comment section. Also, let me know what other subreddits you want me to cover. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Until the next video, bye bye.